to election workers in more than 15 states, including Massachusetts. Some sender mark U.S. Traitor Elimination Army. That upsetting story paired with dual assassination attempts on Trump and goading for more violence from the likes of Musk, New Hampshire Libertarians, J.D. Vance. We'll start our show with you, getting your read on the scary temperature of this moment.
I'm Marjorie Egan. Then some arts and culture, courtesy of GBH Executive Arts Editor Jared Bowen. There are some fabulous new plays out of the ART and Speakeasy Stage Company, and does singer Miley Cyrus owe more than flowers to her pop star contemporary Bruno Mars? All that ahead on Boston Public Radio 89.7 GBH, live from the Boston Public Library.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Janine Herbst. A new round of explosions have gone off in Beirut today, a day after explosives planted in Hezbollah pagers across Lebanon and Syria killed at least 12 people and injured thousands. Now Egypt is warning that the Middle East is on the brink of a regional war. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Egypt trying to calm tensions, as NPR's Michelle Kellerman reports.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken has spent months trying to prevent a regional war and get Israel and Hamas to agree on a ceasefire in Gaza. The trouble is, he says, as the diplomacy continues, events intervene.
That threatens to slow it, stop it, derail it. And anything of that nature, by definition, is probably not good in terms of achieving the result that we want, which is the ceasefire.
He says the U.S. is still gathering evidence about the exploding pagers in Lebanon. Egypt's foreign minister says he believes this attack will hinder the work on a Gaza ceasefire. Michelle Kellerman, NPR News, Cairo.
Former President Trump returned to the campaign trail yesterday with a town hall in Flint, Michigan. NPR's Stephen Fowler reports he touched on a wide range of topics.
Over the course of an hour, Trump monologued about this week's thwarted apparent assassination attempt, his rally crowd attendance, and how his comments aren't rambling, but rather, quote, genius statements. He also took 3 questions from voters, including one from a union auto worker who asked about threats to manufacturing jobs. Trump's response started like this.
I'll get into another little bit of a long answer, because when you say major threat, to me we have one really major threat. That's called nuclear weapons.
From there, his 9-minute answer included asides about President Biden, global warming, a potential World War III, and a meeting with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi before eventually getting to the answer, tariffs. Stephen Fowler, NPR News, Flint, Michigan.
Meanwhile, Trump campaigns in Uniondale, New York tonight on Long Island, and Vice President Harris addresses the Congressional Hispanic Caucus today before holding a virtual campaign event. Emmett Martin III, a former Memphis police officer, returned to the stand yesterday, testifying against 3 of his former colleagues who were accused of violating black motorist Tyree Nichols' civil rights through excessive force during their violent arrest last year. Nichols died in a hospital 3 days later. Katie Reardon of member station WKNO has more.
He now says he embellished the reasons for stopping Nichols in the first place. He initially saw Nichols speed up to beat a red light. He ran his plates. They came back clean, but he radioed to others to pursue the car. He testified that's against policy because there was no evidence of a felony.
Katie Reardon reporting the officers accused are also black. The Fed is set to cut interest rates for the first time since 2020 today. This is NPR News.
Good morning. With the latest from the GBH Newsroom, I'm Henry Santoro. People who own mini trucks and cars that are imported from Japan can once again register them here in Massachusetts. The Registry of Motor Vehicles has reversed a policy that was announced in August that it would no longer register mini trucks, also known as K-cars. At the time, the RMV cited safety concerns because the lightweight vehicles don't meet federal highway standards. And while the K-cars will be allowed on the roads, the RMV does plan to conduct a formal study on how they should be classified. The popular nationwide restaurant chain Red Lobster is no longer in the red. That means that the restaurant's popular Cheddar Bay biscuits are safe. Yay! Well, the company is now under new ownership, has exited bankruptcy, and is flush with $60 million in new funding and a new game plan. Red Lobster filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in May. They closed 99 locations amid a search for qualified bidders to take over the struggling chain. And according to a release from earlier this week, Red Lobster now operates 545 restaurants in 44 states, and they are also in 4 Canadian provinces. In sports, Red Sox Rays back at it again tonight. The Patriots are getting ready for their Thursday night football game against the Jets on the road. In the forecast, increasing clouds and upper 70s today. We could see some much-needed rain overnight with cloudy, low 63, then rain on tap for most of the day tomorrow, high about 70 degrees, and they're saying more rain and mid-60s on Friday. This is GBH News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Lisa, a mattress brand who believes good sleep should come naturally. Lisa donates mattresses to nonprofits across the U.S. to improve their communities. Learn more at leesa.com.
Eastern Browdy, I am Marjorie Egan. You're listening to Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH. We are broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library, streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. Later in the show, the former mayor of Boston, Kim Janey. Michael Curry is with us all the time from the NAACP and a big healthcare guy, and Ted Landsmark. You may recall he was the lawyer in the three-piece suit, black lawyer in the three-piece suit who was attacked by a teenager from Charlestown with an American flag 50 years, well, actually he was 76. But we're talking about 50 years since Boston's busing crisis. It's the anniversary of that, and all 3 of those people were intimately involved in the busing situation. Good morning, Jim.
Hey there. I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Me
Since
too.
we both are, and we think you probably are too, we decided to not do our little texting segment at 12:55 today. We'll return to that tomorrow. So with less than 2 months to go until the election, concerns about violence come November and before are growing. Donald Trump, as you know, has withstood 2 apparent attempts on his life, and his running mate and other allies are openly discussing the possibility of assassination of Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. Right-wing anti-immigrant rhetoric has led to bomb threats, school closures in Springfield, Ohio. The war between Israel and Hamas has led to violence here in Newton between pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian demonstrators. And the FBI is now investigating the delivery of suspicious packages with white powder sent to election workers in more than 15 states, including here in Massachusetts. So with all the talk of the stakes of this election, are you fearful that American democracy has frayed to the breaking point? Around the world, the perception of America as a bastion of liberal democracy has been shaken ever since Trump entered the political sphere, with more people globally saying they expect violence here. The lines are open, 877-301-8970, call or text. By the way, we're not talking about violence post-election were Trump to lose. That clearly will be his goal based on history. The issue is, you're worried about violence in our communities leading up to the election in the 48 days to go. 877-301-8970. I want to repeat, we have this Libertarian Party just to our north that is talking about assassinating Kamala Harris, and whoever did it would be an American hero. We have the shooter in Newton, as you've mentioned before, and I just mentioned a minute ago. We have one of these 16 packages. The good news is the one package that, at least as of this morning, has been analyzed. It was flour, not something terribly dangerous, but nevertheless scary, right at 1 Ashburton Place. This is not some faraway land. This is happening. This is right here in our midst. And the question is not just the fear of violence in a country where violence historically has generally not been part of our election cycle. What does this do to people's willingness to serve as election workers, like those 2 women, Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, who won that $100 and some million verdict against Rudy Giuliani after their lives were ruined by Giuliani and Trump? You'll remember them. What does it mean for voters? Are they going to say, I don't even want to go to the polls? I don't mean in huge numbers, but in small numbers that could decide elections in key states. This is really, at least to me, a terribly frightening kind of development, Marjorie.
Well, NPR had a great summation talking about our long history of political violence in the United States, but there's this new twist to it. And they talked about of course, obviously, back before the Civil War, that was pretty bad. And there were bad other periods. But in the 20th century, the 70s were considered kind of the high watermark of violence. A lot of anti-Vietnam War agitation, the activists fighting for Puerto Rican independence, domestic terrorism like the Ku Klux Klan. But what they see is kind of different now is we've got kind of a politics and then we've got the culture wars, and all that is thrown in with kind of this polarization of the country, like we're so 50-50 split, and then the rise of all these conspiracy theories and the misinformation and the disinformation, and kind of everything that's gone on too with Israel and Gaza has become a big, as you mentioned, the situation over there in Newton. And then
also in the 70s, it wasn't top down. Now a lot of it's coming from the top rather than the ground.
Well, that's one of the points of this story. I should put in the gun culture thing before I move on to this. And we'll talk about with Juliette Kayyem a little bit later, but she was the first person I heard talk about something called stochastic terrorism.
What's that mean again?
Well, it's a terrorism not necessarily motivated by a certain ideology, but instigated by what individuals may be inspired to carry out based on dog whistles of somebody who might be a charismatic leader. And of course, I think when I say that, people think of Donald Trump.
And the pet eating is a good example, I would guess.
Yeah, the egging on, or kind of walking right up to the line and pushing supporters right into the mindset of violence by saying things like, oh, we got to fight really hard, it won't be a country. Or, go ahead and, take somebody out in that rally, because we don't like, if you beat up the person at the rally, don't worry, I'll pay their medical bills. And then when you're accused of, or their lawyer bills, I should say, where they're accused of doing that, then they say, well, it was just heated rhetoric, it's nothing. So I think that's what is very prevalent now, is that kind of stochastic terrorism. They're talking about, obviously, political leaders like Trump.
877-301-8970. I missed, I was watching The Choice. We're going to have Michael Kirk, the brilliant filmmaker from Frontline, with us tomorrow. The Choice is what he does every 4 years with these deep profiles of both of the major candidates running for president. So I missed Anderson Cooper. But speaking of dog whistles, J.D. Vance was talking about fascism last night. Could you fill people in on what happened there?
Yeah. So they put together a great clip, because he's been running around complaining that the Kamala Harris side is as bad as the Trump side, and I don't think that's anywhere near true. So here's this side-by-side kind of deal, courtesy, as you said, from Anderson Cooper on CNN. First, you'll hear J.D. Vance at this campaign rally chiding Democrats for talking about Trump and the threat of fascism. And then you'll hear Donald Trump.
Look, we can disagree with one another, we can debate one another, but we cannot tell the American people that one candidate is a fascist, and if he's elected, it is going to be the end of American democracy.
She's a fascist. Far left fascists. These are young, smart people that happen to be fascists. These fascist movement that wants to throw you in jail. Fascist. This is fascist. They're fascists. He's surrounded by fascists. They corrupt and fascist regimes.
That's pretty great.
Now, what is very funny about that is I think some people have called Donald Trump a fascist because he's a right-wing guy. He's an authoritarian guy. He's a dictatorial guy. He likes military kind of stuff. He likes Putin.
Strongmen.
Yeah, strongmen. So this is a right-wing, Antifa, right? That was anti-fascist. That's what Antifa was. You can't be calling Kamala and all her followers a fascist all the time. At the same time, you're saying she's too liberal to run the country. It's kind of, it's kind of mixing up his terms there.
We're going to get to your calls and texts in a second, 877-301-8970. J.D. Vance is obviously attempting to be a mini Trump, and I think failing. He's obviously attempting to be a provocateur. Can you remember one candidate for national office in our lifetimes who has never had a good day as a candidate? There's no day that J.D. Vance doesn't step deep. I'm serious. I mean, this guy is a drag on this Trump ticket, unlike anything. It may solidify his MAGA base, but I don't think Trump needed J.D. Vance to solidify his MAGA base. Can you think of one thing he's done since he was named that has helped the candidacy of the guy he's running? I'm serious. Is there one thing?
Well, I think the problem for J.D. Vance, he's obviously a really, really smart guy.
I'm not sure that that's as clear. You think because he wrote a book?
No. I just think he's a very smart guy. I mean, who came through a hellish childhood and has got serious problems with the horrific childhood he endured.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And I think he needs a bit more therapy. So the problem is he's together with Donald Trump. We also know has some serious problems. So you have two people desperately in need of therapy who could be running the country in just a few months, Jim.
You know, by the way, for those, one last thing before we do get to your calls, I think it's important so that we don't, I don't know if I can handle today calls saying that, both sides, that kind of thing, because it's not even worth 30 seconds of discussion. I used to lobby Mike DeWine when he was a member of the House of Representatives when I was lobbying in Washington. He's a very, very conservative, I think pretty honest guy, but a really rock-ribbed conservative Republican. Here's the governor of Ohio, Mike DeWine. Again, he supports his senator, J.D. Vance. He supports Trump's candidacy. Here he is on ABC's This Week refuting the Haitian migrant lies from Vance and Trump.
Look, there's a lot of garbage on the internet. And, this is a piece of garbage that was simply not true. There's no evidence of this at all. There are hate groups coming into Springfield. We don't need these hate groups. I saw a piece of literature yesterday that the mayor told me about from purportedly the KKK.
I played that for two reasons, Marjorie. One, to say, please don't waste your time today saying you saw a social media post suggesting the pet eating thing is true. Again, the very conservative governor of Ohio, who supports Vance and Trump, says it's a piece of garbage. But you know what he didn't have the courage to do in a statement?
What?
Criticize Vance and Trump for perpetrating it. He was willing to criticize it, but criticize the online perpetration of the pet-eating thing about Haitian migrants not willing to call out the people who are responsible for it.
The Globe had a story the other day, front page, I think it was in the Sunday paper, about the people that were the big critics of Trump, including Sununu up in New Hampshire. They've all come back to the fold. I mean, he was...
Total fraud. Fraud.
He's not running.
Nikki Haley, too.
You know what, Sununu, he's not running again.
I know, so why, you say?
Sometimes people tell the truth when they're not running again, but...
not there.
He hasn't. Seth in Salem, thank you for calling.
Hi, Seth.
Hi, how's it going, guys?
Good.
I just wanted to say that there's no doubt in my mind that there's going to be some sort of political violence that is incited by Trump this election. But one thing that I need to encourage everybody to listen to is the latest episode of a podcast called Prosecuting Donald Trump. And it delves into how they cannot steal the election and what sort of safeguards have been put in place since 2020 to avoid that. And I think it put my mind at ease, and I think it would put a lot of people's mind at ease out there.
Well, except Seth, if I may, before you continue, I'm glad to put your mind at ease, but it's full of crap. I mean, I'll give you an example. They are putting election deniers in positions of power in Georgia. And their goal, if you read these stories, is to ensure that there is not certification of a Harris victory if there is one in Georgia, so the legislature can pick the electors. And if Harris's campaign has a problem with the legislature picking the electors, you know who decides the issue? Trump's nominees and 3 other conservatives on the Supreme Court of the United States. So with all due respect... Okay, well, I don't think the protection...
Go ahead, Seth. Why did you think this was so definitive for you, made you feel better?
I was absolutely in Jim's corner on this one, and there's still part of me that's a little bit leery about this. But I really suggest that you listen to it, and they're absolutely not Trump supporters in any way, shape, or form.
What's the name of it? One more time, Seth?
Prosecuting Donald Trump.
It's called Prosecuting Donald Trump.
Who did it?
The latest episode of
Who did it, Seth?
Andrew Weissman.
He's a congressman.
Guy.
No.
Yeah, he's in Congress now, isn't he?
He was the Mueller guy. He was on Mueller's Russia.
No. You're talking about Goldman, who's now in Congress.
Oh,
he was on the
sorry.
We will definitely check it out, Seth, and I hope it's more encouraging than I feel. And Seth, thank you for sharing that with us. We appreciate it.
As long as we're recommending things, I should recommend something I saw last night on HBO, Stop the Steal. And that was obviously after the election in 2020. Mm-hmm. But it was a fascinating, well, actually it started before the election with Trump even then building up or taking away people's confidence that the election would be fair. But it's a fascinating look at how we got from the fall of 2020 to January 6th. It's quite scary. And one of the points that you made about the heroism of a lot of Republicans that did the right thing, particularly Raffensperger down in Georgia, who was under enormous...
And that his assistant in the Secretary of State's office...
Yeah, Gabriel Sperling.
Right, who said someone's going to die.
Yeah, it's really worth watching if you have HBO. And when I was watching this, I was thinking, thank goodness for those rock-ribbed, very honest, upstanding, and courageous Republicans who stopped this around the country. And I was no fan of Mike Pence's policies, but thank God for him on January 6th. But to your point, there's been a lot of reworking of a lot of these legislatures and these people in charge since then, which makes me nervous. So I'll have to listen to Prosecutor Donald Trump.
Speaking of courageous, you and I praised, what's the name of the guy who's the former Speaker of the House in Arizona? Can you look it up and let me know?
I know who you're talking about.
He's the guy who testified in front of the January 6th committee, says, I couldn't do what Trump asked me to do because I believe in the Constitution. I believe in the Constitution. And it was really, and he's another very conservative Republican.
And people surrounded his home.
Rusty Bowers, thank you, Zoe.
Scary.
And as soon as he walked out in the hall, he was interviewed by a reporter, and he says, well, if Donald Trump is the nominee, will you vote for him? He says, yes.
Yeah, he was in Stop the Steal last night, too.
Oh, he was?
Yeah, he was in Stop the Steal. Kept asking Rudy Giuliani. A lot of great scenes of Rudy Giuliani with whatever he put on his hair dripping down.
At that press conference?
The dye that didn't work as well as it should have. Anyway, Todd from Attleboro, thank you for calling.
Hello, Todd.
Hey, thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
So I called in before about Haiti because I worked there close to 20 years ago for about years. I remember Senator DeWine, I'm not going to identify the organization I work with, he would come down, he was a donor. I had colleagues that took him out to see the project. And I am extremely disappointed that he's not more vigorously speaking out against these horrific comments against the Haitian
Well, let me be
community.
clear, because maybe I wasn't. He's speaking out powerfully against, as he calls it, a piece of garbage, the reports about the pet eating thing. He is not identifying his party's nominee as the source, as the perpetrators of this. That's where he has shown weakness, and I'm disappointed too, Todd. What did he care about this because there's a significant Haitian population in Ohio? Is that why he was participating in your work?
I can't recall 20 years ago what the population in Ohio was. I mean, he made multiple trips to Haiti.
Really?
My colleagues I worked with, my colleagues would take him out to see projects and activities. I didn't meet him personally, but I knew he would be coming in. We would be discussing planning.
Well, we appreciate. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm really disappointed he did not denounce, like I said, the Trump and Vance's.
So am I.
Rhetoric and falsehoods about the community.
Todd, thank you for the call. We are, by the way, I think people know, are we the third largest concentration of Haitians in Greater Boston?
I think we're one of the biggest.
I think it's the third largest, and I think Ayanna Pressley is the co-chair of the Haitian caucus in Washington. We are attempting to get a couple of leaders in that community to join us next week to talk about what sort of the trickle-down impact beyond Springfield, Ohio has been based upon all this. 877-301-8970.
Bob in Arlington, thank you for calling.
Hello, Bob.
Hi, first time, long time.
Thanks.
What I've noticed is what Trump and Vance are doing is a perfect advertisement for how they see America. Look at Springfield and how they've taken advantage of that town. They targeted it, and they're still targeting it. They will target towns, cities, and individuals that don't agree with them. And this is the type of America, not life, liberty, and the happiness that we want and know. And I just think they're a perfect advertisement for themselves.
We have a hard time. We heard what you said, and I've got to let you go only because the connection is bad, but we appreciate your point of view, Bob, and thank you for sharing it with us.
Before I go to the break, as long as Bob brought up Ohio, did you mention the Ohio sheriff
No, I did not. I hope you will.
Yeah, this was a really weird story. This sheriff in Ohio, who I guess he's, however they make up the towns and counties there, he's a big law enforcement guy, clearly. He's gone around instructing residents to keep a list of homes displaying campaign signs that support Harris and Tim Walz. And he says that's because he wants to know who had these signs up in case Harris wins, and then they can blame any more undocumented immigrants coming there on Harris. By the way, most of the people in at least in Springfield are documented, but people there are kind of freaking out because some of them do have Harris signs up, and they're wondering if they're going to face some kind of backlash. And we're going to talk later about this kind of thing going on in Florida with Ron DeSantis running around asking, with law enforcement showing
election police
doors, asking if they sign petitions to get an abortion matter on the ballot. And the people, may have signed it in a supermarket 5 months ago, and all of a sudden somebody from the law enforcement, the cops, or the sheriff's office comes up with 10 pages on with your license, your registration, everything about you, asked if you signed a petition. This is, when we talk about fascism, I think those are kinds of fascist things. Mussolini, he was one of the most famous fascists, I guess, and things didn't go very well for him or for Italy under
Well, a lot of people think that was, remember Trump in the COVID moment when he had COVID and stands up on the balcony at the White House, that he was attempting to mimic the man you were just speaking about. So
anyway, we're talking about this scary kind of moment in our history here, where there seems to be a lot of violence and threats in the air. 877-301-8970 is the number to call or text. Are you worried about violence in the streets surrounding this election? You're listening to Boston Public Radio 89.7. We're broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library and streaming online at youtube.com/GBH News.
The Itaipu hydroelectric dam in southern Brazil is massive. The electricity generated is shared between Brazil and neighboring Paraguay, which gets more than 3/4 of its electricity from the plant.
Eu acho que ela deve estar entre as 7 maravilhas do mundo.
This woman says it should be among the 7 wonders of the world. We go on a visit next time on The World.
This afternoon at 3, here on GBH News 89.7.
Our programs are made possible thanks to you.
And North Shore Music Theater, presenting $1 Million Quartet, the jam session with Elvis Presley, Johnny Cash, Jerry Lee Lewis, and Carl Perkins that made rock and roll history at Bill Haney's North Shore Music Theater, September 24th through October 6th. Tickets at nsmt.org. And Atlantic Design Center by Eldridge Lumber and Hardware, committed to helping you achieve your vision for a new kitchen or bathroom and guiding you from design to completion, with showrooms in York and Portland, Maine. AtlanticDesignCTR.com.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Mark Regan, Jim Browdy. We're live at the library, streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. In the noon hour, we're going to be skipping our texting segment. We'll get back to it tomorrow to make more space for a look back at 50 years since busing was initiated in Boston, with Michael Curry and former Mayor Kim Janey, both of whom were bused as little kids, and Ted Landsmark, who, as you know, was in that iconic photograph with a white guy attempting to impale him on a flagpole. If you're just tuning in, we're not talking about violence that may occur should Trump lose, a la January 6th, post-November 5th. We're talking about violence in the 48 days leading up to the election. And the most important point, I think, for this discussion, for people listening here, is it's not somewhere else. We saw a shot in Newton. We saw the Libertarians saying you'd be an American hero in New Hampshire, the Libertarian Party, if you were to assassinate Kamala Harris. A suspicious envelope delivered to the Secretary of State's office. Didn't get there, but it was stopped right outside 1 Ashburton Place. It's happening here too. We want to know what your reaction to it is, because this is not something, at least inspired by some leaders, in quotes, in this country, rather than a bottom-up kind of thing. Bernadette, you're on the road. You're on Boston Public Radio. Thank you much for calling. Hi.
Hi. I just wanted to thank you for having the conversation, because it seems to me that Trump uses the word fascism as much as he does because he's neutralizing it. He's rendering it meaningless.
It's very smart.
And that's a fascist thing to do, right? So every time he does this, he takes what is being said about him legitimately, and then he just starts spraying it around, and it makes it not matter anymore.
Bernadette, you also have a horrible connection, but that was a fabulous point. And I don't mean to keep pitching this, but I am such a fan of the work of Michael Kirk, as is Marjorie. In his film, which comes out next week, but we'll talk about with Michael tomorrow from Frontline, he talks about where this all came from, where in Trump's history this notion that when you're accused of something legitimately, the best way to undo the accusation against you is to accuse your opponent of the exact same thing that they haven't done, but you have. And so make sure you listen, Bernadette, to the show. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Remember that horrible moment, the debate between him and Clinton back in 2016?
You're a puppet. You're a puppet.
You're a puppet. You're a puppet. It was so embarrassing. That was almost as bad as the golf game discussion between Biden and Trump. That was pretty bad, too.
Well, I mean, but the worst example in this campaign is when the Democrats have legitimately, in my opinion, accused Trump as a threat to democracy, which I think is hard to respond to.
You're getting criticized by that from a texter, Jim.
Well, let me get it out of my mouth, and then you can read the criticism. It is, and then Trump immediately says Joe Biden's the greatest threat to democracy, and now it's Kamala Harris. And unfortunately for Trump, there's no evidence to that effect.
Well, one of the texters says you are falsely claiming he would end democracies. Do you want to defend yourself, Jim?
I mean, I don't know if that's a joke. It's a joke. I'll be a dictator just on day one. And you may have missed this because maybe you slept through it. He attempted to overthrow the government of the United States. Other than that, I don't think he's a threat to democracy. Remember January 6th, or were you out of the country at that time?
Well, it's also the idea of firing all these civil servants and loading them with people who are loyalists to you, so they make sure that everything you want to get done gets done.
He's an insurrectionist.
He's also talking about taking over the Fed. Can you imagine if Donald Trump decides what the interest rates are going to be if he wins? I mean, talk about inflation now. You ain't seen nothing yet. But he's talking about that because he's upset that Jerome Powell might lower the interest rates any day now. Because what?
He's going to lower them at 2 o'clock today.
Yeah.
Not any day now.
Oh, I thought, is it today?
It's 2 o'clock today.
2 o'clock today.
The question is it a 0.25? Is it 0.5? Without giving you a headache. Can we spend 30 seconds on something I know you hate doing?
What?
But I can't get over. Is that person for real? Falsely claiming
Jim,
that he's a threat.
He
attempted to overthrow the duly elected government of the United States leading up to January 6th. He's not a threat to democracy?
I guess this person thinks he's not. I mean, we just talked yesterday about how people believe what Donald Trump says. Millions of people believe him. Pete in New Hampshire texted,
What's he
"You're
say?
calling Republicans frauds for flip-flopping." Actually, that's not the discussion.
I didn't say that.
I know, but that's what this texter is saying. Yet you fail to mention Kamala Harris has called Biden a sex-assaulting rapist. Well, Pete in New Hampshire, she hasn't called Biden. She means Trump. He means Trump.
Oh.
He is.
Well, he is a sex-assaulting rapist. That's one of the reasons she said it.
He's been civilly found guilty of rape in the Jean Carroll case and defaming Jean Carroll. He continues to defame her anyway, even though he's had to pay, was it $85 million for her? And I think he's up to, how many women have accused him of sexual?
I think 2 dozen.
2 dozen. So, yeah, he is. He's also a felon, and he's a tax cheat. He's a lot of other things.
Mike and Roslindale, you're next. Thank you for calling. We welcome you.
Oh, you're welcome. So very, very interesting topic, but it's just kind of, I agree with you, Jim and Marjorie, but that texter that you have a hard time believing what he's saying, Jim, this is a big part of the country out there. You know, it's probably the 40-45% that have still voted for him, at least 40 that believe that. I saw on Facebook just yesterday someone I know who's very active with the local Catholic Church, and he's a big Trumpster, and he's, with this latest alleged assassination attempt, he's blaming the Democrats, and he has language, they won't stop until Trump is dead, and he quotes Kamala Harris and Tim Walz and what Biden said, and it's all the language that Democrats use. It's got to get Trump killed, and the Democrats are evil, and he seems to forget about January 6th, or they look at it from a different lens. I mean,
No, but by the way, you are totally right. And obviously, if you believe, as you're suggesting correctly, that a large swath of MAGA people believe the election was stolen, then that's true. You don't believe Trump is an insurrectionist. He was just trying to ensure that the proper outcome happened, of course, through violence. The problem is, and I'm not quarreling with you, Mike, I'm quarreling with those people, the election was not stolen, as evidenced by 60-plus election decisions and his own attorney general and the vast majority of the non-lunatic people who worked for him. But Mike, you're totally right, and thank you for adding that to the discussion.
Well, large numbers of people believe Trump when he says that in the United States of America it's fine to assassinate newborn babies on the delivery table. I mean, people believe this stuff. And obviously lots of people believe the cats and dogs thing, even though it has been debunked over and over again.
Can I just want to say one last thing to that texter with whom I had a problem. I'll make you a deal. Next time we discuss this, we will take your call first if you call and identify yourself. If you promise that you will go back and watch the testimony of Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman in front of the January 6th committee about what happened to their lives because of the total made-up crap from Rudy Giuliani and Donald Trump. Watch that. Tell me you did it, and next time we discuss the election, I promise we'll give you all the time you want on the air.
Meanwhile, if you have HBO, watch Stop the Steal.
Yeah,
it really shows how people get swept up into this insanity. And they had these videos of the election workers, in Georgia, and they were among the election workers in Georgia, moving these suitcases around, and Rudy Giuliani saying, "Look at them. Look at them. They're putting in ballots there. They're cheating. The Dominion voting machines going on and on." So I can see where if you have the former, Mayor of America, Rudy Giuliani, and all these Trump people telling you again that the moon is purple, then sometimes, or a lot of times apparently, you begin to believe that the moon is purple.
By the way, next Tuesday, Marie St. Fleur, former state rep, who I believe was the first Haitian American member of the state legislature in Massachusetts, will join us to talk about what this totally made-up, dangerous rhetoric out of Trump and Vance around Springfield, Ohio, means to her community here.
Yeah, and the problem is that the Republicans could have done something about this,
by standing up for the truth.
They have just sucked up hook, line, and sinker with a couple of rare and very courageous exceptions. Anyway, we are moving on now. Up next, we're going to be talking to GBH's arts editor, Jared Bowen. The Boston Film Festival has got a great lineup, and we're also talking about this incredible career of an orphan from Sierra Leone who rose to the heights of the dancing world and died too young. You're listening to Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH, live from the Boston Public Library and streaming online at youtube.com/GBH News.
This week on Under the Radar with Callie Crossley, a decade before the buses rolled, local community organizers pushed for desegregation of Boston public schools. 50 years later, after that violent time, two sisters tell their busing story. That's Under the Radar with me, Callie Crossley, tonight at 9 here on 89.7 GBH and the GBH app.
Support for GBH comes from you.
And the Office of the Massachusetts State Treasurer. The Unclaimed Property Division is holding unclaimed funds from medical bills, uncashed paychecks, savings accounts, and more. To see if you have unclaimed money, you can visit findmassmoney.gov. And Cambridge Savings Bank, where they are committed to your financial well-being, and community is at the core of everything they do. Cambridge Savings Bank. Always you. More at cambridgesavings.com. Member FDIC.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jim Browdy and Marjorie Egan live at the library, streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. Now joined at the desk by Jared Bowen. Jared is GBH's executive arts editor, host of The Culture Show, which airs right after us on 89.7 at 2. Hello, Jared Bowen.
Hello, great to be with you both.
And you.
Hello, Jared Bowen. So let's start with the Boston Film Festival. Where do we go? How do we see it? And what are the highlights?
Well, one of the best things to do is to go to the bostonfilmfestival.org website, because there are different screenings happening across the city at different locations, all the way up to Rockport, actually, at the Shannon O'Brien Performing Arts Center.
Love that place.
And the great thing about the Boston Film Festival is that it's 40 years old this year, and Robin Dawson, who's been its longtime director, formerly of the Film Office here in Massachusetts, has a longtime festival goer, and she began to notice as she was attending festivals years ago just the impact you could have when not only you showed these films, and often they're world premieres, but what happens when you can bring the actors here and you can bring the director and you can have a Q&A and you can have a conversation about it. And this is what part of the film festival circuit is all about. As I mentioned, sometimes they're world premieres, sometimes New England premieres, but often it's your first chance to see films, and you'll see everything from a comedic depiction of the Isabel Stewart Gardner museum theft to Democracy Noir, which is looking at Viktor Orban through three people who have tried to penetrate what he's doing in Hungary right now to get a sense of how things have shifted in that very conservative environment in his government.
By the way, speaking of that thing, which I'm going to watch tonight, the comedic, not totally true story about the lead up to the Gardner Heights. Eric Aronson, who's the director, who's written a lot of big films. He's going to be on tomorrow as a first-time director with us, as well as Jimmy Tingle, whose film is not at the Boston Film Festival, but his first film about his run for lieutenant governor. So what's the website again?
So it's bostonfilmfestival.org. It all starts September 19th and goes through the 23rd.
Are there winners like in the European things, or these are just, I don't mean just, but are films shown, or are there?
That's a good question. To my knowledge, there aren't awards like the Audience Award and things of that nature. I'm not sure that we do that here.
You know what sounds, very soothing? I know the Piping Plovers have had their crises, but the Piping Plovers of Moonlight Bay talks about these two birds and their lives. I'm hoping that that's not horrible for the
that is really a great celebration of the Boston Film Festival.
You're looking for things. I told this to Jim. I had COVID last week, and you're looking for things to make you feel better while you're watching COVID. So I watched that trashy Nicole Kidman lives.
Oh, I loved that.
Yes, about The Perfect Couple.
Yes,
shot in Chatham and Nantucket and stuff, and it was
written by Hildebrand. That's her
Ellen
deal.
Hildebrand. Yeah, we talked about her a few years ago. I read all these great books about Nantucket, but it was fun. It was trashy. Get your minds off things. So I was thinking when I saw the Piping Plovers, because they're so cute, that maybe it would be up.
We have them on next week, by the way. Do you know that the Piping Plovers
are be here?
They're on Tuesday.
They'll be scampering across
they are.
Our little desks
they are.
here.
By the way, I don't even have COVID. That's all I want to see right now. It's just beautiful, pretty, happy, trashy. But although I didn't even think it was that trashy. I thought it was kind of fun.
I thought the acting was terrific, especially when Liev Schreiber gets really drunk at the book launch of Nicole Kidman and falls off the stage.
By the way, the trailer, which is all I've seen so far, this Any Day Now, the thing we're going to talk about, looks fabulous, by the way. And there's been a lot done on the heist, but this is a sort of a semi-fictional account of the buildup, right?
Wouldn't it be funny if that was the one thing
to
finally get the paintings returned?
Okay, so Bruno Mars did a song in 2012, When I Was Your Man. In 2023, Miley Cyrus, I think, won her first Grammy, is that right?
Yep.
For Flowers. That was 11 years later. Mars people are saying she stole the song, or at least stole part of it. Here's first Bruno Mars singing his deal, and then there's Miley Cyrus. Here it is. I'd say guilty. What would you say? That's...
Well, I want to hear what Marjorie said. I was going to ask you, she did exactly what I wanted to do. What do you think, Marjorie?
I couldn't tell.
I think when I listened to it this morning, I thought guilty, and then when I just heard it again, I thought not guilty of plagiarism here. So this is what's really interesting, and this is what makes these cases really, really difficult. So yeah, as Jim explained, the backstory is that not even Bruno Mars, actually, because there are other people behind him now who apparently own the rights to this, looked at this and they thought that Miley Cyrus and her writing team copied a whole bunch of things like pitch, sequence, chorus, lyrics, shadows of the lyrics there, chord progression, and so they have sued Cyrus and her co-writers, not to mention Target, Amazon, Walmart, Sony, the distributors of this, And we've seen this happen a lot over the last few years. The last big case was Ed Sheeran.
Yes.
The Marvin Gaye estate sued Ed Sheeran.
What happened in that case?
He won.
And he won.
Yeah.
Wait, who won?
Sheeran.
Ed Sheeran?
Ed Sheeran won. But the Marvin Gaye estate also had sued Robin Thicke and Pharrell Williams a few years ago for the song Blurred Line, and they lost that one because I think...
Wait, who lost that one? The current people, not
Pharrell
Marvin Gaye
Williams
won.
And,
Well, he didn't win as the state won. Yeah.
Well, Pharrell Williams and Robin Thicke lost that
Right.
one because this becomes very complicated. Because in a sense, you're asking juries to decide something that's quite complicated, and that's listening to music and what do you hear. We just heard at least two variations here at this desk about this, and often these get thrown out of court, or there's a settlement, or they're challenged later. One of these cases, at one point, went up to the Supreme Court. I can't remember which case specifically because this does pop up often, but it's happening again now.
Do you ever, I mean, every time I think Miley Cyrus is wildly talented, as is Bruno Mars. Whenever you look at her, do you say to yourself, I can't believe this is Hannah Montana, and this is, I mean, she's really like a really, you know, I don't know if you've ever, she does a Dylan cover, which is not her typical kind of thing, that is as good a cover of a Bob Dylan song, don't ask me what the name of the song is, I can't remember, as anything I've ever heard. She's just really, can you look that up, Jamie, instead of staring at me, please, like I'm a fool? Jamie's looking at me like I'm a dope, and I figure maybe I am. But, thank you, Aiden, you're gonna make me lonesome when you go. Okay, there you go.
Well, she also seems to be a really good person. I mean,
She
not that
is.
that counts here.
She is.
I was just talking to a friend recently who saw her in Los Angeles because she had this album out and she wasn't able to do as much touring as she wanted, so she was just doing these little small sets for family and friends, and then anybody who else happened, I think it was at the Chateau Marmont in Los Angeles, and anybody who happened to be there, she was welcoming them in. Yeah, she's pretty cool. It's funny because when I got my Wrapped by Spotify at the end of the year, this was the song I had listened to most because I think it's such a fun song, and it had never even occurred to me, as much as I've heard the Bruno Mars song, that they could be similar.
And by the way, one of the best things to say about her, beyond her incredible talent and apparently decent person, is her loser of a father has allegedly disowned her, which I think is a badge of honor as far as I'm concerned.
But we love her godmother.
Who's her godmother?
Dolly Parton.
Is that true?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Dolly Parton is a wonderful person.
She is incredible.
You had a great interview with her.
She's amazing.
Yeah, she is
Who
amazing.
doesn't love Dolly? Everybody loves Dolly.
Yeah, I know. I always wonder, you never see her husband. She keeps him under wraps.
Carl Dean.
Yeah.
Where's he?
Who knows?
Exactly.
You don't know.
Exactly.
You don't know, but they've been married forever, right? And they're still together.
They've been married forever. They're still together. They're still married. She talks about him every now and again.
Yeah.
He's probably just running things at Dollywood.
What good thing did she give $1 million to last year or the year before that was really...
Well, there was the vaccine.
Oh, it was the vaccine development thing, right?
And then she does the books, where she distributes books
she's
all
incredible.
across Tennessee.
She is really incredible.
Yeah, the children's books.
So I was transfixed by this story in the Globe and the New York Times about Michaela DePrince, this young woman who was raised in an orphanage in Sierra Leone. Her father was murdered in the mines. Her mother died of malnutrition. Her uncle dumps her in an orphanage where she was given a number 27, and goes on, and she's a black young woman, to become a huge dancer, principal dancer at the Theater of Harlem. She goes and becomes a big star in Amsterdam, the ballet there, the Nutcracker, leading roles in George Ballantyne's Tarantella. First of all, I've never heard of a kid coming out of an orphanage in Sierra Leone or almost anybody else, and also she's black, and you don't see that many black dancers. So how did this happen for this young woman?
Yeah, we're talking about this because she died this week at age 29, and she had been at Boston Ballet. I never met her or saw her dance, but I've read a lot about her. Her story has been out there, so I don't know the circumstances of her death, but she had talked about her story for a while in interviews and in a documentary and in her own book, Taking Flight, which documents that brutal childhood that she had. And then there was this couple from America who came and they adopted her because in this orphanage had been taken over by a guerrilla group. It was just horrible. By the way, you said she had the number 27. That was her ranking. She was at the bottom of the orphanage. She was given a different name, and so was number 26, I think, who was right alongside her, was given the same name, and both of them were adopted by this couple. She came out of that, as you say. She went to Dance Theater of Harlem, and then the Dutch National Ballet then came here to Boston. I remember trying to interview her once for Open Studio, and at that point, as she had also discussed publicly, she didn't want to talk about her story anymore because it seems like it was re-traumatizing to her. And then suddenly we learned this week that she dies at age 29. The really heartbreaking part is her mother, the woman who adopted her, died the next day. And the family's saving grace is that the mother hadn't known, the mother who had been ill with a heart problem hadn't known that her daughter had died.
You know, one little piece to this, do you read, I don't know if it was in the New York Times or the Globe, maybe it was both, about her and her sister in the orphanage, sort of plotting out ballets and dances, and then
she
all
found
of a
that
sudden,
dance magazine.
Right,
and
that's
stashed
what it was.
away.
That's right. That's right.
And she admired the elegance of the dancers. But when I think, maybe I'm wrong about the ballet world, and maybe it's changed, but I don't think of that many black premier ballerinas. It's usually white women, lots of times they're not American either.
No, it's changing, and she was often mentioned alongside Misty Copeland, who is one of the most famous black ballerina dancers that we know today. She's very famous. She has lots of arrangements with different companies. She's written a book because often black ballerinas were told they couldn't dance because of their body shape. Misty Copeland talked very openly. I spoke to her once about this for an interview, how the horrible eating regimens that she went through because she thought she had to lose so much weight because she didn't have the body style that was favored, AKA what mainly white dancers were having. But hopefully we're moving beyond that in this world. There's also a great book that was recently written, The Swans of Harlem, that talks about even before Misty Copeland, there were a whole trio, or
Judith
more than...
Jameson? Is that...
No, it wasn't Judith Jameson. Karen Valby is the author, but she documents about 5 different dancers who preceded Misty Copeland by decades, and finally trots their stories out and shares them with the world.
We're talking to Jared Bowen. So Jared, you know Marjorie well enough to know that there's nothing she likes quite as much as a love story between great artists
this is a great
of the past.
story.
You had Sebastian Smee on, who beyond being one of the great writers of all time is so smart, it is like painful kind of thing. Tell us about his book and who he writes about.
Yeah, this is a great book. It's called Paris in Ruins, Love, War, and the Birth of Impressionism. This is really a fascinating story that I didn't know most of what it was. So the significance here is that this is the 150th anniversary of Impressionism. Monet, later Van Gogh, Renoir, just the very colorful, quick brushstrokes, moving away from realism kind of paintings that were once super contemporary art and quite derided, that they were just impressions of life. That was actually a derisive term when it was first used. But this came after 2 horrific wars that had happened in France. One in which the Germans had invaded France. They dealt with that. And then there was a civil war in France in 1870 to 1871, what Victor Hugo would later call the terrible year. And this is when you had the French fighting each other. You had the French blowing up their own bridges and buildings. This was being covered around the world. America was looking at this after we had come through our own civil war. And so you find, he documents a number of artists like Manet, Bert Morisot and Manet had quite the affection. We don't know how far they took it, but
we were all intrigued by that.
Yeah, it was very electric, and you can see this, Sebastian Smee argues, in the way they painted and with the stories they were telling about each other in the way they painted, but also Renoir, Monet, of course, and Pissarro, and Edgar Degas was a huge figure of this. During this entire war, it was so traumatic, it was so horrific that they didn't really paint, they didn't actively work, a lot of them were very politically involved, and then after the war, they broke away completely from what was before to move into what became, again, Impressionism, but it was also this recognition that life is very impermanent, life is very fleeting. We have seen the worst of it, so let's just capture it in all its beauty now.
So let me embarrass myself and say I didn't know there were prominent women Impressionists. I didn't mean on the ground, I meant who we knew about. Was she it?
Basically, so there were a number of salons for the Impressionists, and she was the only woman in all but one of the salons. The only one she wasn't in was the year that she had a child.
But you know what I loved about this, too, is I had seen that picture of the cradle a million times, and there's a young mother overlooking her newborn in the cradle, looking exhausted. And I remember when I first learned about Mary Cassatt, who did all those pictures of domestic life, mothers with their children, babies on their laps and stuff. And I thought this was so wonderful because that was not really, I mean, you'd see these occasional things of the woman with the Vermeer things, the domestic, I don't know if you call that woman, was that woman a housekeeper, the woman that was standing there?
The milk, I think
the
milkmaid.
Yeah,
I
the
don't think
milkmaid or
that's
something
what
like
it's
that.
called,
But anyway, and this woman seemed to be doing that too, a lot of beautiful domestic art, which I loved, and it's a wonderful present to get for a new mother, is that a book of Mary Cassatt's photographs, because they're mostly her, well, not necessarily her, but models with their newborns and their little kids.
And there were other women, but whose history has not remembered, so that's why we often talk about Cassatt or Bert Marisot, but they had to do this with their own conviction because they had been told that, well, you have other things to do in life, aka find a husband, have a family.
That's right.
And if you haven't done those things yet, which she hadn't until later, why aren't you doing them? But she had to find the conviction to go out and paint and then be part of this circle, and they really respected her, of course.
Speaking of having a husband, by the way, one of our colleagues looked up whatever happened to Carl Dean, the husband. There's a beautiful photograph of them walking into the renewal of their wedding vows in 2016.
Oh, there you go.
It's actually a beautiful little thing.
Well, I remember the pictures of them when they were first married. He was quite a handsome guy, and she was a beautiful woman. So there you go. They were
He's a little rounder in 2016.
He's a little rounder. Okay.
I mean,
by the way, she was 30, I think, and I read in Sebastian Schmidt's story before she did, which is older in those days to even start your family. But she was older. Right?
Yeah, it all came late again because she was really focused on her art, and but she was insecure about life because of where she was at that stage. The other thing I'll say about Sebastian Schmidt, what I found really interesting is there were moments I had to put this book down and walk away because it's really, really tough. His depictions of these war scenes, and again, we're talking about the French fighting the French in the Civil War, were so evocative and they were so vivid. It was really tough to process. Everybody should read it because it's compelling reading. But it occurred to me that I read a lot of history books too, but I think he has a different style of writing because he's an art writer, so he's observing history the same way he might paintings.
Well, since you said that, we weren't going to play it because we're short on time, but when you had him on your show, he's now at the Washington Post, I assume people know. He's talking to Jared about the ruins of Paris and the Franco-Prussian War that led to the Impressionist movement. Here's Smee and Jared.
The population were reduced to eating pigeons and rats, and the zoo animals had
That
to
was
be
a
killed.
horrific passage in your book, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, it really got bad. It got really dark. It was one of the most brutal winters in living memory. All the trees were cut down for firewood. You can almost imagine it. The place was like a sort of enormous barracks, an army barracks, because a lot of the male population had joined the National Guard to try to defend the city.
He speaks pretty well, too, not to mention the incredible writing. We only have a couple of minutes. Let's do the play. Romeo and Juliet is closing earlier than Laughs in Spanish, so we can do the Laughs in Spanish next week. Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah, this is a great production at the American Repertory Theater, directed by Diane Pauls, who's also their artistic director. And what I really was really struck by about this is going into it, I knew, she also writes about this in the program, that Diane Pauls wanted to focus on not the hate that we usually find in this story, because we know the families are feuding, and this is what makes these lovers so star-crossed, because they have to be at all ends to find their love, because they're doing it under the cloak of darkness because of their families. She wanted to just focus on the lover's love, and that comes through in her casting here. They're played by Emilia Suarez as Juliet, and Rudy Pankow from the Outer Banks, a big television star, is playing Romeo. And on a very bare stage, this really comes alive and is very electric. She is partnered again, Diane Pauls has, with Sidi Larrabee Cherkawi, who is a choreographer with whom she'd worked on Jagged Little Pill. And so he brings this really propulsive movement to the stage, and so you feel this love manifested. You see the other characters coming into this. Speaking of other characters, she's also cast Terrence Mann, a big Broadway legend. He's been in a number of shows, including Her Pippin, but also Les Mis before that as Friar Lawrence, the mechanic who's trying to make sure that this love stays intact. It's a really terrific production.
What do you mean propulsive movement? What does that mean?
Because when the characters are feeling something, their bodies almost lift up and they move forward. There's just a physical manifestation of what they're feeling, and it just brings everything together.
A lot of chemistry.
It's also there's a lot of
chemistry. A lot of
sexy
stuff going on there.
October 6th, that's right. It's when it's there till, right? October 6th.
Yeah.
Some fun dance parties in it, too.
Have you seen it?
No, but speaking of Nicole Kidman, I guess she's got a pretty sexy one coming up.
Well, let's not do that yet, okay?
we talked about that. Your COVID brain is setting it. We talked about that.
I know. Well, the new one, though, that got a standing ovation at the... Not the...
That is now Baby Girl.
Baby Girl. We talked about that, and then I chimed in and said that Daniel Craig
has his... Did we already talk about Baby Girl?
Swayze one, yeah.
Oh, God, that's really scary.
Yeah, but that was a week ago. That was a long time ago. Why would you remember that?
It was probably 2 weeks ago, actually.
Exactly.
It had been 2 weeks ago, that's right.
That's it.
Do I have COVID brain now?
I don't know.
Things can't
You're
get much
better.
worse.
It's fine. It doesn't...
I didn't mean to call you out like that,
okay.
sorry.
It could be good. Give a long, slow slide. Okay. We've been speaking with Jared Bowen, GBH Executive Arts Editor and host of The Culture Show, which airs daily on 89.7 at 2 p.m. and on Fridays. It's right here.
Oh, we didn't ask him what he's doing today.
Yeah, what are you doing? Real quick.
Quickly, 10 seconds.
The Irish hip-hop group, rap group, NECEC is back with us. We talked to them in March. Now that they're big Hollywood stars, we're talking to them again because they're likely going to get...
Boston Public Radio with Jim Browdy and Marjorie Egan. Just ahead,
more smart conversation about what's going on in our community. That's right after an NPR news break, here on GBH News 89.7.
Funding for our programs comes from you.
And We Clean Heat Pumps, providing cleaning and maintenance of ductless mini-split heat pumps for the protection of air quality in homes and businesses before the heating season begins. More at WeCleanHeatPumps.com. Lions, leopards, and cheetahs, oh my! Using the latest technology, a team of filmmakers follow big cats through the Okavango Delta. Don't miss Big Cats 24/7 tonight at 8 on GBH2.
Trusted. Local. News. You're listening to 89.7 WGBH, HD1 Boston, online at gbhnews.org. GBH News with NPR. What matters to you.
I'm Jim Browdy, ahead on hour number 2 of Boston Public Radio, live from the Boston Public Library. Yesterday, 11 were killed and hundreds more were wounded.
McCurry, later head of the Boston NAACP, and Kim Janey, who would go on to become the first city mayor who was black and female. Then Ted Landsmark, whose image came to define the moment by way of the Pulitzer Prize-winning photo, The Soiling of Old Glory. He's now a distinguished professor at Northeastern. That's all ahead. Hour number 2, Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH, live from the Boston Public Library.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. More attacks in Beirut today involving communications devices, including pagers used by the militant group Hezbollah for messaging, exploding, killing at least one person and wounding dozens more, according to the Lebanese Red Cross. At least one exploded near a funeral for 4 victims of yesterday's attack, which killed 19 people and wounded nearly 3,000 individuals. NPR's Jana Raff was there.
This was in the streets around the funeral ceremony after the coffins had been carried away to the cemetery. An 11-year-old boy and a nurse were among those being mourned in yesterday's attack. 2 others were Hezbollah fighters. All were killed when the pagers they were near or were holding exploded. Mourners at the funeral were told after the first blast to take their batteries out of any pagers. Hezbollah has vowed revenge against Israel, and many Lebanese are deeply unsettled over what comes next. Jana Raff, NPR News, Beirut.
For the first time in decades, the United States is experiencing a decline in the number of people who overdose on drugs and die. The downward trend started late last year. It's happening faster, and researchers don't know why. Many experts say public health measures have helped, but doubt it's driving the big decline in drug-related deaths. As NPR's Brian Mann reports, they're now racing to figure out how to keep the downward trend going.
Because someone survives an overdose doesn't mean they're free of addiction. But what addiction experts are telling me is that by reversing the catastrophic level of death, this is an important first step. If this trend holds up, it gives thousands more people in the U.S. a chance, a shot to get into long-term recovery.
NPR's Brian Mann reporting. The Federal Reserve is expected to start cutting interest rates this afternoon. NPR's Scott Horsley reports that would be a milestone in the Fed's 2.5-year battle against inflation.
Inflation is not yet back to the Fed's 2% target, but it's moved a long way in that direction. And with the U.S. job market showing signs of weakness, Fed policymakers say it's time to start taking their foot off the economic brake. Today's rate cut is the first in what's expected to be a series of rate reductions over the coming months. That'll make it cheaper to borrow money, to buy a car, finance a business, or carry a balance on your credit card. There is some uncertainty about how big that first step will be. The Fed typically adjusts interest rates by a 0.25 percentage point at a time, but many investors think today's meeting will produce a larger half-point rate cut. Scott Horsley, NPR News, Washington.
Turning to Wall Street, U.S. stocks trading lower this hour. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is down more than 100 points at 41,505. It's NPR News.
Good afternoon. With the latest from the GBH Newsroom, I'm Henry Santoro. According to the Office of Secretary of State Bill Galvin, voter registration in Massachusetts surged for 2 days after Taylor Swift endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris for president. Swift's endorsement of Harris and her running mate, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, came moments after the September 10th presidential debate. Swift posted her endorsement on her Instagram, and it included a photo of her holding her cat, Benjamin Button, and was signed Taylor Swift, childless cat lady, which was a dig at disparaging remarks Trump's running mate J.D. Vance made about women and Democrats. Post got more than 11 million likes. Meanwhile, Swift isn't the only celebrity to endorse Harris in recent days. In an Instagram post yesterday, singer Billie Eilish and her brother Phineas said that they'll be voting for the vice president as well. Eilish added, "Vote like your life depends on it, because it does." If you're a family making $150,000 or less per year, Deerfield Academy would like to extend an offer of free tuition at that school. The story was first published in the Wall Street Journal and says the initiative is open to U.S. families who can provide 2 years of verifiable W-2 income with assets consistent of their income profile. Deerfield has an annual fee of almost $75,000 for boarding students and nearly $54,000 for day students. This is a good deal. Red Sox Rays back at it tonight in Florida. In the forecast, increasing clouds, upper 70s today, 77 right now. This is GBH News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Progressive Insurance with Snapshot, a personalized program that bases rates on safe driving habits, at Progressive.com. Not available in California or from all agents. This is NPR.
He is Jim Browdy. I am Marjorie Yeagan. Welcome to hour number 2 of Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH. We are broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library and streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. In about a half hour, we're going to be joined by 3 people who are intimately involved in what we've come to call the busing crisis in Boston on the 50th anniversary of busing. We're going to talk about that with people who were there on the ground. Hello again, Jim.
Hello again. That, by the way, is Michael Curry and former Mayor Janey, who both of whom were bused as little kids, and Ted Landsmark, who obviously was in a photograph that defines that time probably as well and as sadly and as painfully as virtually anything. We're joined now by national security expert Juliette Kayyem. Juliette is the former Assistant Secretary for Homeland Security under President Obama, the faculty chair of the Homeland Security Program at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, and a contributing writer for one of the best publications on the planet, The Atlantic. Juliette, it's great to see you.
Great to see you.
Hey there.
Thank you.
So
great to be back. It's been a while.
Where were you? Where were you?
I was a lot of places.
I'm sure you were.
I was.
A lot of consulting contracts.
And family and everything, and it was just, it was August and September. So it's been,
I've been a couple.
It's good to see. It's good to be here. It's good to be back.
So tell us about these exploding pagers
Oh my gosh.
in Lebanon. Apparently, the Associated Press is reporting there have been more explosions today.
Yeah, from walkie-talkies. So here's what we know, and then based on my expertise, I'll explain a little bit of what might have happened. Is, of course, simultaneously members of Hezbollah received some sort of communication through their beepers that then led to an explosion, killing 7, but also bystanders, as we know. So how could this happen? So Hamas moves to beepers, as most organizations that want to keep out of Hezbollah keep out of public telecom systems, right? They wanted to, because Israel had infiltrated their communication system maybe 6 or 7 years ago. So they moved to a beeper system, essentially, to communicate. That beeper system is not as sophisticated, and beepers do not have what our iPhones have. Our iPhones have, if your lithium battery starts to get too hot, anyone who's taken it to the beach knows, it turns off on its own. That doesn't happen, as I just show everyone my cell phone, that doesn't happen with beepers. So some malware got in, heats up the battery, and then some sort of trigger has come through that notification. Based on my expertise in this space, I believe now that somehow Israel got into the supply chain of the devices and infiltrated, putting something in them, some sort of hardware that would have them explode simultaneously. It'd be very hard to do through remote or software because the batteries would get too hot. It would get hot at different times. I talked to a bunch of people I know in Lebanon and law enforcement and elsewhere. That's the running theory there in terms of how they could have done this. So this means that two things for Hezbollah. One is their communication systems is down. They don't know what's going on. They don't know who's in, and number two is they have been infiltrated at the supply chain level, and that is, that means trust no one. So I don't know what the response is going to be, but this is a big deal.
So as of this morning, Israel was not formally claiming credit. All the experts say nobody else could have done it.
This is my yes face.
I have no expertise, unlike you in this area. So what is the strategy? Yeah.
So the 2 days before Netanyahu, who one could argue wants a perpetual war for political purposes, and obviously rightfully should be criticized for not getting deals done as he should, is going to continue the war front. So 2 days before this happened, Netanyahu basically signals that he wants Israelis to get back into northern Israel, where they have left because of the attacks by Hezbollah from Lebanon, and sort of wanting to continue it. So what's his strategy? I mean, one is, of course, you keep everyone fixated on the potential that Netanyahu or something he does will start a regional war, and therefore he gets what he wants. I mean, in other words, he then becomes the focus. How does he want to negotiate?
You mean like
How does
weaponry?
He want this? Yeah, everything, right?
Okay.
That you got to keep Netanyahu, that a madman is willing to start a regional war. That's one theory. The theory.
Which madman? The Hezbollah people or Netanyahu?
Netanyahu.
Okay.
This is not going to get the hostages out. Let's just put it that way. You think Hamas is going to look at this and go, we're more scared? No. They're going to look at someone who is willing to go to the next front very aggressively. The Iranians have been relatively quiet. They're mad because, I mean, and I'm not defending anyone. The Iranians have now a lot to explain why their diplomats were on the same communication system as Hamas. They're like, oh my God, our diplomat has, why do I keep doing that?
Well, whatever it is, we know what you're talking about.
It's bad commentary. Hezbollah, excuse me. And so the Iranians are complaining because their ambassador to Lebanon was impacted by this, was injured by these detonations. And but that's just proof that the Iranians are sort of in a direct connection with Hezbollah. And so that's how it unfolds. I don't know what happens in day 2, 3, or 4. The Israelis, I mean, clearly did it. We don't have to be shy about it. No one else has the desire or capacity to plan something like this. It is epic, though. I've never. There are people in Lebanon who I was talking to who think it's possible that the Israelis may have created a communications front company that somehow got in with Hezbollah.
Low bidder.
Like a low bidder type thing. And the whole thing was an Israeli front.
Do you have family in Lebanon?
Yes, still.
You do still?
Yeah. And this is, I mean, between the explosion and it's so horrible. I'm
sorry, you go ahead. No,
I just want to say one thing about, yes, this is a successful counterterrorism campaign. There is another country, right? And Lebanon is that country where this is getting played out on. And so to remember, Lebanon is now stressed to the point of critical in terms of its medical capacity. 1,000 people, I think, sought some sort of care. They are now low on blood. So, I mean, this does impact civilians, not in the same way that it impacts Palestinians in Gaza, but as someone who knows lots of people in Lebanon, it's not like this is like, oh, it was a targeted attack, like they go after the head guy. This is impacting all of Lebanon, and plus the fear of what's about to happen next.
You mentioned the Palestinians in Gaza. We have talked a lot about anti-Semitism here. We've all talked about trying to get the hostages back and the crisis and the tragedy when the 6 hostages were found dead. But we've been talking about people in Palestine being on the edge of starvation for months now. Do we know, or what are they getting any aid?
I think it's how do you define starvation? So there's deprivations of food and other needed commodities, and what is it now? It's how many million? 3 or 4 million have been displaced. And so I don't know what the trigger is to say starvation. I do know that our attempts to alleviate it are now completely shelved. That port that President Biden announced in the State of the Union, I guess this year.
Out in the water.
Out in the water that the military is going to set up did not work.
Yeah.
Period. Both because the water was a problem, but also the distribution out couldn't be secured in the way that the military would need their distribution system to be secured. And so that is one element that's lacking.
Well, there's also something we learned that we shouldn't have had to learn is people who have expertise in this area, public health people, the great Jose Andres have talked about even if adequate food and supplies were provided today, when little kids go without adequate nutrition for months and months, their whole lives are negatively affected, even if they survive. You know, you mentioned that both you mentioned the hostages. I have to say, whatever we've done in the last 6 months, two of the most moving moments were when we had relatives of Yarden Rahman Ghat, who was 57 days in captivity. Her brother and a cousin were here. She escaped. And then Carmel Ghat, who was executed recently, and her husband was here right before that when he was the one, remember Marjorie, was invited by Netanyahu to fly over from Israel on Netanyahu's plane. And he was so outraged that Netanyahu was not doing enough to get the hostages home. Again, Carmel Ghat had not been executed yet. He refused to fly on Netanyahu's plane. Nothing is proceeding at all in these potential ceasefire hostage talks.
Yeah, and I would guess that the attacks on Hezbollah they're not going to expedite that.
Well, isn't Netanyahu at this point waiting to see if Trump wins?
Yes.
Isn't that what he's doing?
Yeah.
But the flip side is, you would argue, you've asked a million times, Marjorie, and I don't know enough about why is Biden not exerting at least more public pressure on him. I would argue that this is beyond the humanitarian issue, which I'm sure, as a good person, matters a lot to Biden. It also matters a lot in electoral politics that this thing get resolved before November.
Yeah.
I hate to be crass about it, but it will potentially have an impact. So one would assume if the pressure was going to be elevated by Biden, whether it's public or private, the next, what do we have, 48 days left? The next month would be the time to do that.
But I just don't see why there's any incentive at this juncture for Netanyahu to do anything.
There isn't. I mean, and I think the proof is yesterday with the campaign in Lebanon. There is no pressure, and once it gets resolved, the Israelis, from all the polling I've seen, are going to turn on him and are just waiting for that. I don't know if they've already seemed to have lost patience. We've seen hundreds of thousands out in the street. I mean, they have more political discourse about what's going on there than we often do.
That one-day demonstration, we did the math. The same percentage of the Israeli population that was on the streets that day about a month ago would equal 35 million people on the streets in the United States of America. It was a tenth of the population
and it was
of Israel that decided to do this.
It is spontaneous.
So can we just continue with horrible stories for a minute?
Of course. Why else am I here?
Here's J.D. Vance speaking Monday in Georgia, giving his first public remarks since the latest assassination attempt on Donald Trump.
But you know, the big difference between conservatives and liberals is that no one has tried to kill Kamala Harris in the last couple of months, and two people now have tried to kill Donald Trump in the last couple of months. I'd say that's pretty strong evidence that the left needs to tone down the rhetoric and needs to cut this crap out. Somebody's going to get hurt by it.
Yeah, somebody's going to get hurt by it when you say that no one has tried to kill Kamala Harris. We've discussed ad nauseum. You'll be an American hero if you assassinate Harris from the New Hampshire Libertarian Party, to Elon Musk doing almost the exact same thing that Vance did. We discussed with you a lot after January 6th your thesis, which worked out, as you said, for years, that the more the Justice Department goes after individuals involved, many of whom are just real people who got swept up in this, lose their jobs, lose their partner, lose their income, lose their whatever, it's going to trickle down, which it did. But it seems to me the issue now is not what happens if Trump were to lose post-November 5th, which I assume would be violence part 2, but what happens in the next 48 days? We talked about Newton, the demonstration, the pro-Israel demonstration with a shooter, the Libertarian Party, packets of substances undiagnosed, or whatever the word is, to the Secretary of State's office in Massachusetts.
And other And
15
barely
other states.
a blip of a story.
That's a
now.
wonderful point, by the way.
That story sort of like came. I was like, what? Like a whole bunch of.
Well, since you
substances.
said that, when we read this morning, to make that point, Margie and I read that 16 secretaries of state or election divisions got this. We didn't even know that Massachusetts
was one of them.
Was one of the
yeah.
16.
Under the radar.
No, it's just like exactly that they were.
So how prepared are we for the next 48 days?
I mean, I think we have. I think we are aware of the risk. I think many in law enforcement find it uncomfortable to be aware of that risk. In other words, it just feels like that's just like messy politics, and it will get worse. And I think J.D. Vance has a nice little narrative that they're fine and we're not. The data is clear that the domestic violent rhetoric, threats, and execution of those threats started ticking up big time in 2016, and that's because of this rhetoric. And then it's only gotten
and it's mostly
worse
from
over
the right.
time. It's mostly from the right. Yeah, the right-wing terrorism. And let me just be clear about the Trump assassination attempts. This is outrageous, and I condemn political violence. I condemn the violence part. I don't give a damn if they are right-wing or left-wing. But the idea that these guys are categorically left-wing, like that's a nice little narrative for J.D. Vance. It is just not true. And so if you want to be honest about what's going on, it is that there's a radicalization going. The guy in Butler is like, I call that an assassination of convenience. He's just looking about who's close by.
We still don't know what was going on.
He was looking
with
at where Biden's schedule was. He was looking at Trump is down the street. I'll do this. This guy, Tulsi Gabbard, like some fixation on Ukraine, a little bit of hero desire, to be viewed as a hero, and we still don't know. I mean, the charges have been pretty basic so far. It's clear he wanted to harm Trump, but I can't have a narrative about him yet. And I think that's what most people are in my space are talking and monitoring, which is it's not this left-right thing anymore. It is just the violence, and then someone grabs onto a narrative that they like. Look. I mean, you want to talk about violence in Springfield, Ohio. The schools are closed for 2 or 3 days. They have to cancel some art forum thing or art conference thing that they have, and
the hospital is in
festival.
lockdown.
Yeah, I mean, so this is happening everywhere all the time.
You know what I thought was an interesting little piece? It was about the golfing and former presidents.
Yes.
That the Washington Post did, and it's talking about how the Secret Service have been trying for ages to get Trump not to golf on his courses that are really close to public roads. And down the Cape, where I spent a lot of time in the summer, a million years ago when JFK was the president, they built a big fence that's still standing. So they must have built it in 1959 or 1960 or something across the road, so you couldn't see from the public road the golf course. The fence is still there, and you'd have to go down some very narrow streets, and they used to block off all the traffic there. I remember when I was a little girl. But they talk about how these different presidents, like when Reagan, some guy came barreling through the gates of Augusta National. Reagan was playing the 16th hole, and after that, he only played at the secluded Sunnylands estate in Rancho Mirage, California, and how Barack Obama only played up at the military bases. I guess he played a couple of times down in Martha's Vineyard, but I think that was a couple of times when he was president, but after when he wasn't president because of fears of being able to target these guys. Well, it's because the Secret
Service, and we have learned, as that article notes, that the Secret Service has been telling Trump, we can't secure this in the way they are now. Look, there was some gap going on because that guy was hanging out there for 12 hours with the car. But when you have the threat environment around Trump that they have, and he spontaneously, this was not my understanding from the reporting.
They didn't know it.
They didn't know it. He then decides to go. They know the facility. They now have lots of people around him. There was never, line of sight or whatever they're saying. There was never a threat then, although if it had lasted longer, there might have been a threat later. And they're just trying to sort of do security whack-a-mole, right? So a protectee has an obligation also to accept the advice. No one's blaming the victim here, but we do know from lots and lots of reporting now that he is aware of the vulnerability of his golf courses. He's not a private citizen, and he sort of acts like it. And he's not just a former president, right? He's somewhere in between, and he's a candidate like no other because of the public aspect of what he likes. He likes to be watched. He likes to be out there on the golf course.
Can I tell you that I'm with you on the golf course thing, but John King was with us yesterday from CNN. And he said one of the pieces of advice that the Trump people have gotten from the Secret Service is don't have outdoor rallies.
Yeah.
Well, if Trump decides that I want to do an outdoor rally because that's the best thing for my candidacy, he's got to be protected.
He's got to be protected.
Golf is a whole different deal as far as I'm concerned. And can we end with this?
Remember the picture of him on the golf course that he hated because it looked pretty bad, but his rear end looked really big when he was shooting the golf. Somebody, photographer with a long lens, was able to take a picture of him on the golf course, which is not a good sign security-wise. That was about 4 years ago.
So 48 days to go. There's no. Marjorie doesn't like when I criticize the Secret Service because it's more a resource thing. She argues than competence.
Yeah,
I don't know enough.
Like.
Well, I don't know enough to know whether you're right or not, but what I do know is they're at risk. So, same question about real people. How prepared are we to protect these two people, these four people, for the next 48 days?
I think three of them we are very prepared because it seems like they have
Trump is the one.
Very regimented schedules that are aligned with the campaign. Look, let's just be, Harris is a runner. We don't see her running. We're not going to see her running. That's apparently a form of exercise she likes. We're not going to see her running right now.
Bill Clinton used to run to the McDonald's.
Oh, I know. That's hilarious.
I've done that thing a ton of
dolphin shorts. My favorite is anyway, and Trump is too spontaneous given the risk environment, but he likes being spontaneous, so I don't think he's going to change. I was going to say my favorite is the McDonald's. I get a Big Mac and a Diet Coke. It's like the offset.
Yeah.
I call it the Big Mac.
I don't think so. I really doubt that.
I will tell you a cheeseburger. My kids say I become like an animal. I love. Give me a hamburger, a cheeseburger any day.
Everybody who believes that, raise your hand. I don't think so.
I'm
Shake Shack?
Shake Shack is Michelle Obama's guilty pleasure, she says.
See, that's my guilty. Yeah, but you offset it with a Diet Coke, and then it's 0 calories.
Fair enough. Nice to see you, Juliet.
Bye, you guys. I'll see you next Wednesday.
Good to see you again.
And sorry about the Hamas-Hezbollah. That is shameful.
No, that's
okay.
Sorry.
Thank you so much.
I
Good
get
to see
mixed
you.
up all the time, Juliet, and here I am, the co-host. Anyway, we've been speaking with former Assistant Secretary of Homeland Security. I know, it's an outrage. Under President Barack Obama and faculty chair of the Homeland Security Program at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government and a contributing writer for The Atlantic, Juliette Kayyem. Thank you very much. Up next, this month we mark 50 years since the start of what would be remembered as Boston's busing crisis. We're going to talk with one of our regular guests, Michael Curry from the NAACP, Kim Janey, who was the first woman and the first black woman to be the mayor of the city of Boston, and Ted Landsmark, you may remember him. He was the black attorney in a three-piece suit who was attacked by a teenager from Charlestown with the American flag in what became a Pulitzer Prize-winning photograph of racial unrest in Boston. You're listening to Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH, live from the Boston Public Library and streaming at youtube.com/GBH News.
At libertymutual.com. And Plymouth Patuxent Museums. More than 400 years later, Thanksgiving is still the most talked about meal in American history. Visitors can experience the holiday this fall. Details at plimoth.org. And Mass General Brigham, dedicated to building a world-class center of cancer care. With the most cancer surgeries and specialists in New England, they're committed to being with patients for every twist and turn. Learn more at massgeneralbrigham.org/cancer.
College campuses are the latest front in America's culture war. Protests, DEI backlash.
DEI has always been under attack.
Student loans.
This entire scheme is nothing more than a transfer of wealth.
I'm Kurt Carapezza from GBH News.
And I'm John Marcus from the Hechinger Report.
The new season of our podcast, College Uncovered, is out now, and we're tackling the politics of college education. Listen today wherever you get your podcast.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Marge Regan and Jim Browdy live at the Boston Public Library, streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. In 1965, the Massachusetts legislature passed the Racial Imbalance Act and a move to officially outlaw segregation in the state's public schools. 9 years later, 1974, then U.S. District Court Judge for Massachusetts, Judge Garrity, issued his own ruling to forcibly desegregate Boston schools by way of busing. 50 years ago this month, 18,000 children, particularly those from the city's poorest neighborhoods, began being bused to different corners of the city. It was a decision that would spark years of animosity and racial tension, in turn shaping and in some cases defining Boston's image in the public eye, not to mention changing the trajectory of so many children's lives. Here's a little sound of young black kids who were interviewed that year. This is from WBZ.
They were throwing eggs at the window and trying to hit people with them. And while we was in school, they was throwing glass at black people and little kids. What school was this again? The Roger Class.
Here with us now to reflect are two people who, as kids, were bused. Michael Curry, former head of the Mass NAACP and current CEO of the Mass League of Community Health Centers. Michael, it's good to see you as always.
Good to be back.
Kim Janey, the city's first black, first female mayor. She's currently president and CEO of Economic Mobility Pathways. Mayor Janey, it's great to have you here today. And a man you surely recognize from an incredible incident of violence immortalized in a Pulitzer Prize-winning image by Marjorie's former colleague, Stanley Foreman, The Soiling of Old Glory. He's now a distinguished professor of public policy and urban affairs at Northeastern, and he's the director of the wonderfully named, after a fabulous human being, Dukakis Center for Urban and Regional Policy. Ted, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
So, Michael, let's start with you talking about little kids. I think you were 7
Yes.
when you recall going past the Museum of Science and taking a right into Charlestown.
Yeah, I do. Some things are seared in your mind. And I remember the nervousness of my mother because she was sending us off, and there were some mothers who decided not to send their kids into school. I was in that second wave of what I believe was like 25,000 students, 18,000 in that first wave. And our parents were courageous enough, or if not crazy enough, to put us on those buses. But there were meetings and there were sort of prep sessions on what we would expect in that journey. I remember the fear, and I know it's hard to believe that a 7-year-old can remember fear, but we do. I remember having to duck down. I remember peeking out the window and seeing what appeared to be hundreds of people lining the streets as we made that journey over to Charlestown, angry at kids, and I'll never forget it.
So, Mayor Janey, Charlestown, I think, was your destination too, 11 years old. What was your recollection of those times?
Very similar to what Michael shared, very young. My parents kept me home for the first couple of weeks. They did not agree with the Garrity decision. They did not want to bus me outside of my neighborhood. They felt as if I was getting a good quality education in Roxbury. And like Michael, I can remember the fear. I remember the angry mobs. I remember the distorted faces of the people in the mobs. I remember the police escorts. I remember having to sometimes leave out the back door of school to avoid some sort of riot in the streets. Very, very difficult time for children to experience.
What do you remember about being told about specifically why you weren't going to school those first few weeks?
Well, my parents didn't agree. If I'm not getting a better education by being bused to Charlestown, what was the point?
And they said that to you
Yes,
as an 11-year-old.
they said that. And I was obviously not wanted in that school. So why subject your child to that kind of violence, to that angry mob, especially when they weren't going to get a better education?
You know, that's one of the points you've heard over and over again when you read about the history of busing, is that kids were going from bad schools to bad schools. The black schools were obviously worse, but the white schools weren't so great either, especially in South Boston. But Ted Landsmark, everybody probably has seen the picture of you. You're in an off-white 3-piece suit, looking extremely professional, 29 years old, and all of a sudden, Joseph Rakes, a kid from Charlestown, comes at you. What happened?
Well, ironically, I was on my way to an affirmative action meeting to try to open up more jobs, construction jobs in the South End in Roxbury to people from the neighborhoods and particularly people of color. And I was simply walking across City Hall Plaza when I encountered this group, really mob of high school kids who turned a corner. I didn't see them. And they had just come out of a meeting with Councilor Louise Day Hicks, who had fired them up about race. And they were on their way to the courthouse where Judge Garrity held court. And they encountered me, and I was the first black person they saw. And they decided, a few of them, that they wanted to kill me.
We have, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Go ahead,
talk about presence of mind at 29 years old. We do have sound, as Jim started to say, when you were speaking to reporters right after the attack, and you had a broken nose, your face was covered in bandages. This happened in 1976, and this is sound recorded by GBH for the 10 o'clock news. Here it is.
Safety is not the issue. Busing is not the issue. The issue involves the participation of citizens of color in all levels of business and government that affect the life of this city. And by that I mean participation on an equal basis, and not just as human rights officers and affirmative action officers, and not just as shields to cover the white power structure's indifference towards communities of color. The issue of racism must no longer be subordinated in this city.
Boy, the more things change. Ted Landsmark, I believe Stanley Foreman, maybe in a joint interview with you, talked about the reason he thought something was going to happen that he had to capture was because there were almost all white people. All of a sudden, this black man, you, walks onto the scene. Do you remember what you felt at the time?
Well, I was running late for a meeting, and so I really wasn't thinking about encountering a crowd of angry young people, and I didn't see them coming because of the way City Hall Plaza is structured. They were coming from around the corner, so I wasn't thinking about that. But the moment it happened, of course, I was in a state of shock because it was one of the last things I would have expected to happen at that moment.
You know, we just heard your colleagues on both sides were 7 and 11 when busing happened. You were a young, skillful lawyer. What was your reaction to Judge Garrity's decision when it came down?
I wondered why it was that the focus had been only on Boston proper, and why the suburbs hadn't been included. There were obviously efforts being made to expose young kids of color to different people to whom those kids might aspire to be. And the class differences between the white kids in Southie or Charlestown and the black kids in Roxbury were not all that great, but the class differences between all the kids in the city and many of the kids in the suburbs were substantial.
You know, Michael Curry, you mentioned being 7 years old going to Charlestown. We've all encountered little kids, they don't want to go to school because they got a stomach ache or they got some fake thing going on. I can't imagine what it was like. Tell us, going back, day 2, day 5, day 20?
Yeah, I mean, one is I remember the tension my mother had because my mother she wasn't an activist in the traditional sense, but she was an activist, right? She was conscious enough. She went to school committee meetings since I was a child. She would show up at the school if there was an incident. There was an incident that I often share where at one point something happened in school that they called my mother. So I remember my mother coming up to school to get me, and she tells the story. It was a racist incident that happened in school. So I remember vividly standing out in front of the Warren Prescott in Charlestown where a big, hefty white guy was yelling at us, calling us the N-word and swearing at us. And my mother was standing toe-to-toe with him. That's the Alabama, Birmingham in her. That she felt like she should go verbally back and forth with him. But I remember being by her side and being afraid. When I think about that, to Kim's earlier point about the disparities in the school, and some black schools and neighborhoods had quality education. I didn't come from one of those. I went to the worst schools prior to that as well. And the reality is 2/3 of the funding, black schools were receiving 2/3 of the funding that even the poor white schools were receiving. So the reality is the whole notion was that I was going to Charlestown to get a better education, but yet how can you get an education when you're in fear, when there's racial tension in the school coming from teachers in part, from other students in part who don't want you there, and you're dealing with trauma, because the trauma of going through the gauntlet of hate that we had to go through doesn't make you, capable of focusing on math and English and reading for the rest of the day. So I'm thankful that I had a strong mother who was willing to take the bus to Charlestown at that time. When I think about Ted, she took the bus to Charlestown to come get me.
So how did you get an education like that? I mean, how long did you last?
So my mother eventually ended up pulling me out because of the attention I had and the experiences I had at the school. So it was I don't remember how long I was there. I ended up being transferred to the Jackson Man School.
In Brighton.
Yeah. Which was a much more diverse school. But she was deeply disturbed, and I think she probably even thought about her own safety, because she knew that my mother was ready to set it off, as we would say in our neighborhood. And if she had to come to school to get me, there was risk for her too.
I'm sorry, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, Mayor Janey, and your parents said that the heck with this too, is I understand.
Yes, I did 2 years.
Yeah.
2 years at the Edwards Middle School in Charlestown. Fortunately for me, my parents, I come from a family of educators. By this time, in fact, September 12th, 1974 is my father's very first day teaching in Boston Public Schools.
Oh, wow.
And so for me, I did 2 years at the Edwards, and fortunately for me, my parents kept advocating, and they moved me and transferred me to METCO. So I became a METCO kid as of 8th grade through 12th grade.
Which had been created 8 years before the Garrity decision, for those who don't know.
And really important, because I think we're talking a lot about the Garrity decision. We're talking a lot about busing. It's important for us all to sit with and center the women, like Michael's mom, who had been fighting for decades, even centuries prior to this. So it's 50 years now that we are marking this anniversary, but this fight is centuries old in terms of black parents seeking better education for their kids.
And just when we think about the Racial Imbalance Act and the legislature that teed up Garrity's decision, to Kim's point, and she's a master historian of this, the advocacy of parents to tee up that legislation, and then the advocacy of organizations like Civil Rights and others, the phenomenal leaders that even created that moment. We forget about them. But they created this conversation about equal education, that iconic picture in 1965 of black folks marching down the street around desegregating our schools. We got to remember that too.
You mentioned in passing, but I don't think it should be in passing, about an alternative. Describe your schooling situation, Mayor Janey, before your bus to Charlestown.
Exactly. And so prior to me even entering Boston Public Schools at 2nd grade, I had attended a black independent school. So in the 1960s, late 60s, early 70s, there was this movement in Boston, like in other places across our country, where black families once again were fighting for a better quality education. And so these independent schools were coming up. I attended New School for Children. People like Julia Walker, people like Ruth Batson, people like Jean McGuire, all of these folks were on the front lines, whether they were part of Exodus, whether they were part of METCO or the Black Independent School Movement. And for me, I think that gave me the foundation that I needed to, one, enter into BPS, where I excelled until busing. And then METCO, because those were all varied experiences. But for me, I had that firm foundation.
And in the tradition of freedom schools. Right?
Exactly.
So we're celebrating the anniversary of freedom schools. There were freedom schools in Boston.
Yeah, and focusing a lot on African American history and better teaching. But I want to know, tell Landsmark, you mentioned before that you were surprised the suburbs weren't involved. I can imagine all the parents in Wellesley and Brookline going to court in 2 seconds over that.
Garrity was from Wellesley, by the way.
He was from Wellesley.
Yes.
But was there a better way? I heard a lot of theories. You should have started with kindergarten. You shouldn't have done, you should have mixed it differently. I mean, was there a better way to do this, to try to desegregate the schools?
There were a great many thoughtful alternatives that could have been pursued. Boston itself had gone through decades and decades of enforced segregation in the schools and in most of the city's public services. And so the focus was on Boston itself, but the region was really involved in all of that. And METCO, which engaged the suburbs in taking in inner city kids, had been formed before busing.
Yeah.
So there was a clear understanding that there was a regional issue around integrating education. And Judge Garrity did not look to that as an appropriate example, but instead placed the burden on the parents in Boston to try to resolve the matter internally within Boston itself.
You know, Mayor Flynn obviously been involved in some of this as a younger man, was going to fix it. Mayor Menino was going to fix it. Mayor Walsh was going to fix it. Now it's in, but then you were there, but for a short period of time, 8 months. And then now Mayor Wu hopes to do it. So here we are. The consensus is 50 years later, the schools are as segregated as ever. We failed to mention that 18,000 white kids allegedly left within 18 months after Garrity's decision for those suburbs or parochial schools or whatever they did. Obviously, busing didn't do what it was intended to do. Starting with you, Mayor Janey, what should be done in 2024 to realize the same goals that existed a half century ago but were never met?
Yeah, the issue had always been quality. The issue had always been quality. And for the years since the Garrity decision, we spend a lot of time talking about how kids are assigned to school, but not what happens in the actual school buildings. And so we really do need to shift away from how kids get to school and really talk about the instruction, the quality instruction that is needed, making sure that we have the right teachers and the right school leaders. In preparation for this, you know, I took a look at some of the old documents that were being presented to the school committee by folks like Ruth Batson. Nowhere on here is a call for busing. Nowhere on here is a call for busing. What they're asking for are the resources. What they were asking for were the resources that are needed, you know, a curriculum that reflects the diverse student body of the kids, quality teachers, involvement in the decisions of hiring superintendents, all things that seem pretty basic today, and some of which we've been able to accomplish. But that piece around quality, when there are so many other options now, we have so many children who are now going into METCO, and we have 10,000 Boston kids in charter schools.
Right.
And so until we deal with the quality issue, we're going to continue to spin our wheels.
How about you, Ted Landsmark? Obviously, Garrity didn't do what you thought he should have done 50 years ago. What should Boston be doing now?
I chaired a commission under Mayor Menino that went out into the neighborhoods and asked parents what they wanted for kids in Boston, and it was clear that very few people favored busing as a way of improving the quality of education for their kids, and would have preferred to see a circumstance where the kids could go to high-quality neighborhood schools. And busing at this point is a vestige of a time when the city's demographics were different, when the leadership in the city was different. And I think we're now at a point where we can really take a hard look at what busing was intended to do, what it has actually accomplished, and what it is we need going forward, which I would suggest involves getting rid of busing as it currently stands and reinvesting those funds in quality schools in the neighborhoods.
Well, especially when there's constant stories on the front page about how the buses can't show up on time. I don't understand what's so hard about that.
How about you, Michael? Do you want to add to that list?
If I can, it's interesting because you know the student of history that I am. So if you're black and American, I would say in Boston, we're used to the throwaway schools, the throwaway neighborhoods, you know, name it, the throwaway, right? So the neighborhoods we lived in is because people, when we moved in, they moved out. The schools we go in, we entered, they left. 30,000 left in that first year of busing. So we're used to it. And where did they go? They went to places we couldn't go to. They went to parochial schools that also wouldn't admit us and allow us to come in. They went to independent schools because many of them have resources. The interconnection of these issues is that black families like my mother were relegated to poverty, right? Those 6 million folks who moved to northern cities, my mother being one of them during the 50s and 60s, were relegated to housekeeping jobs. So the masses of black folks didn't have the economic means to then move out of the city, move into communities with better schools, move into parochial education, independent schools. So we were left. So the reality is we can't forget the whole ecosystem that created this dynamic. It exists today. Black families writ large don't have the resources to go to their academy where my son goes, or Milton Academy, or to go to some of the parochial schools. And masses of our kids will be educated in public education. Kim is a major champion and advocate historically around traditional public education. We underfunded, and I would argue defunded, public education where most of our kids go. We never solved that.
But in 2024 in Boston, you know a lot more about this than I do, but just, being a reporter and talking to people on the radio, we do spend a lot of money in Boston on the schools. We spend much money, as you said, on busing. I think it was $11 million a year, or some astronomical amount of money like that. I think
it's a hell of a lot more, actually.
And maybe it is a lot more. I don't know. It's a lot. And the argument, as you point out, that people say, well, I'm in a crummy school. That's why I want to be able to go, to a different school. We have some crazy story about some poor kid that's got a 90-minute trek from Hyde Park to get to the, I think he's at the STEM Academy, Dearborn STEM Academy, 90 minutes each way to get there, which is insane. So what about getting to those neighborhood schools? And maybe the neighborhood school isn't quite as good as the school in Wellesley, but when you have a neighborhood school, you have moms, nearby that you can help out with the childcare, and you have a coalition around the school, and you have parents able to come and hang out in the playground and know what's going on, and all that kind of thing. But that doesn't seem to ever get close to reality here.
Because a lot of what you're describing is a myth. So we found, when we did this task force that Ted sat on and other task force since then, that there are a number of poor black kids who were being assigned to their neighborhood school, and these magical things of parent involvement don't just materialize because of proximity. The issue is still quality and how we get the best teachers in this school, how we make sure we have the right curriculum, that we are creating those opportunities for engagement. Simply being close to the school doesn't do it. You've got to do a lot more if you want to see that kind of engagement and that kind of quality.
Can I interrupt just to say you're off by a mere $100 million? The transportation budget
$111 million
for Boston Public. So it's not all busing that you'd object to, but a lot of it is. $116 million, 10% of the total school budget in Boston.
And most of that is for busing kids who require special education and outside of the district.
And having debated this when Superintendent Chang wanted to eliminate the busing, and part of the resistance from communities of color was the neighborhoods we have to commute through if you take public transportation. And the reality is we haven't solved crime, we haven't solved poverty, we haven't solved mass incarceration, we haven't solved the substance use disorder crisis. And these things make parents nervous to put their child on 2 buses and a train versus a school bus. So Chang and I used to have this conversation. How do we solve for the safety of our children in a city that at times can be unsafe? I think we should be thinking differently about busing and how we transfer children, but safety is a part of that.
By the way, Jill from Watertown texted in, did any of your guests, that would be you three, meet Judge Garrity as adults? Well, you were an adult at the time there, Ted, and talk about the impact of the decision. Any of the three of you ever meet?
Never met him.
Garrity? No, you did not.
You know what I wonder, though? You mentioned this in your story, Michael. You wondered about the parents, that were out there screaming, throwing rocks and eggs and calling people the N-word and stuff. Did you ever meet anybody later on in years that said, I'm sorry?
Well, credit to Lou Finfer and the group that's come together around busing, because it put us in the same room to be in the same conversations. And I hate to make this comparison, but I do, because it's in my mind. When I think about pictures of slavery, I think about those families who stood around when they hung black bodies. And I always wonder, where are they now, right? Where are their kids who are 5 and 6 celebrating or throwing something at the body, right? And we tend to let that sort of die in history. but there's a story behind that. I want to know what they're doing now and who they're voting for and what their politics are. The same would be true about those people in South Boston and Charlestown, because I don't know if we've cracked the code on that hate yet. And the reality is, if we don't ever pull them out of the shadows and have a conversation, then maybe that hate is seeding somewhere else, in a classroom, in a courtroom, on another street corner, because we've never dealt with it.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Ted. My apologies.
Yeah, I have met some of the parents and kids who were involved.
Really?
But it's a self-selected group. They're the people who are willing to come to me. And they have, in fact, expressed regret at what they did and at what happened. But the people who were out there throwing the rocks have not come forward.
Mr. Rakes, that had the American flag that came after you?
Yeah, he has
group?
elected not to come forward, although he's been asked to on many occasions. But many of the parents and kids have said that they lost something too, and that they would welcome an opportunity to enter into some sort of healing process. And I think that that's what Lou Finfer and his group
he's a great guy.
Are trying to do at this point. That is to start some real discourse and dialogue on what we learned and how we apply those learnings to a very different demographic situation within the schools right now.
And Larry DeCara, in his book, he's a friend of mine, but Larry had in a book, something I had never known, that Whitey Bulger was planning to run violent attacks at those buses coming to South Boston. And I think there's a piece coming out soon that tells that story.
Wow.
There's more to this story, right? That what if he had succeeded, he and the mob had succeeded in attacking those buses, and it took his brother and other politicians to convince him to step back and not perpetrate that crime against those children. This is more disturbing than I think we as Bostonians and Americans have even scratched the surface on.
You know what I'd like to do, because we're out of time? We've spent most of this half hour talking about history, which I think is really important. I hope you'll all come back actually as a group, maybe in a few weeks, and focus the whole discussion on the future, based on what we've learned, mistakes are made, some things right, and talk about how we
or how, as Mayor Janey said, how you get the quality schools.
Exactly.
How you get those.
I hope you'll do that. We'd love to have you back, all three of you, and thank you for your time and your thoughts today. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We have been talking, reflecting, I should say, on the 50 years since the start of busing in Boston. Boston's first black mayor and woman mayor, Kim Janey, now president and CEO of Economic Mobility Pathways, the NAACP's Michael Curry, who's also CEO of the Mass League of Community Health Centers, and distinguished professor of public policy and urban affairs at Northeastern, the man who kept his composure and pushed our city forward.
If the kids are heading back to school, but their car isn't, donate it to GBH through our vehicle donation program. Your old car will go a long way in fueling the news on GBH. Learn more at gbh.org/vehicle donation.
Support for GBH comes from you.
And The Huntington, presenting Tom Stoppard's Leopoldstadt, a stirring and epic story of love, family, and enduring bravery set in Vienna at the rise of the 20th century. September 12th through October 13th at the Huntington Theater, huntingtontheater.org. And The Trustees, presenting Halloween on the Hill, a celebration of autumn at the Trustees Long Hill in Beverly, running Wednesday through Saturday nights until October 27th. Advance tickets required. Learn more at thetrustees.org/Halloween.
Trusted. Local. News. You're listening to 89.7 WGBH, HD1 Boston, online at gbhnews.org. GBH News with NPR. What matters to you.
I'm Jim Browdy, ahead on hour number 3 of Boston Public Radio, live from the Boston Public Library. The Executive Director of the Civil Liberties Union of Massachusetts, Carol Road, leads us into this hour. She and her colleagues just finalized
Virginia after a listeria outbreak. We'll open phone and text lines at 877-301-8970 to get your best, worst takes and opinions. Is there any food, that is, you'd like to see on your plate less or never? What other strange foods do you like or dislike? An ode to liverwurst is next. Hour number 3, Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH, live from the Boston Public Library.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. More attacks have erupted in Lebanon today. The aftermath of a new wave of explosions involving communications devices. Lebanese health officials say at least 9 people have died. Hundreds more were wounded one day after a series of blasts involving pagers owned by members of the militant group Hezbollah exploded. NPR's Ruth Sherlock has the latest.
The blasts were reported across Lebanon's south and in Beirut's southern suburbs. This time, handheld radios used by the Lebanese militant group Hezbollah reportedly detonated, according to Lebanese officials and state media. This comes just a day after 12 people were killed and thousands more were wounded in the simultaneous detonations of pagers used by the militant group to communicate. The injured have overwhelmed Lebanon's hospitals, with hundreds in need of surgery. Ruth Sherlock, NPR News, Tel Aviv.
Israel has not officially commented on the incident, but U.S. officials tell NPR Israel was behind the attack. The Federal Department of Justice has filed a civil lawsuit against the owners of the ship that struck the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore earlier this year, causing its collapse and killing 6 people. WYPR's Matt Bush has details.
The lawsuit is seeking over $100 million in damages, the amount that Deputy Associate Attorney General Benjamin Miser says the federal government had to spend to clean up the accident. The suit alleges the owners of the Dolly knew of vibration problems on the ship that could lead to power failures, which the ship experienced multiple times shortly after leaving port on the morning of March 26th.
They configured the ship's electrical and mechanical systems in a way that prevented those systems from being able to quickly restore propulsion and steering after a power outage.
6 construction workers who were on the bridge at the time of its collapse died. 3 of their families announced their own lawsuit against the Dolly's owners on Tuesday. For NPR News, I'm Matt Bush in Baltimore.
House Speaker Mike Johnson says the bipartisan task force set up after July's attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump in Pennsylvania will now also investigate Sunday's attack on Trump in Florida.
We have a responsibility here in Congress to get down to the bottom of this, to figure out why these things are happening and what we can do about it.
The task force may present its first report next week. Both Republican and Democratic elected officials have condemned political violence. Meanwhile, the presidential candidates continue to court votes in battleground states. Vice President Kamala Harris addressed the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute today as her campaign attempts to draw support among younger Latino voters. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is up 26 points at last check at 41,633. This is NPR News.
Good afternoon. With the latest from the GBH Newsroom, I'm Henry Santoro. Worcester police supervisors will be getting raises soon. As GBH's Sam Turkin reports, the Worcester City Council unanimously approved a new contract with the union representing police leaders.
The contract gives supervisors a salary increase of at least 2% over the next 2 years. And the deal is retroactive, so the raises apply to annual wages dating back to 2022. At a city council meeting last night, Councilor Kate Toomey praised the contract.
We need to make sure that our employees are paid appropriately, that they're valued. We're very grateful for them, and I think that this reflects that.
The agreement doesn't give police a stipend for wearing body cameras. That's notable, because a separate contract with another Worcester police union did include a $1,300 stipend that some city councilors opposed last year. Both contracts come as the U.S. Justice Department investigates Worcester police over claims of excessive force and discriminatory tactics. Sam Turkin, GBH News, 89.7.
The home food storage company Tupperware has filed for bankruptcy after years of struggling with its business model and debt. Tupperware wrote itself into the American culture. After its founding in the 1940s, it popularized the party style of sales for its products. It's now struggling to survive. Tupperware said in its bankruptcy filing that except for a spike in kitchenware shopping during the pandemic, interest in Tupperware from either shoppers or sellers has waned in recent years. They're putting a lid on it. This is GBH News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Charles Schwab, offering investors choices like full-service wealth management, advice, investing, and trading on Thinkorswim. Learn more at schwab.com. And the listeners who support this NPR station.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio, 89.7 GBH. He is Jim Browdy. I am Marjorie Egan. We are broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library and streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. Hello again. Jim, here for round 3.
Now, the reason Marjorie and I are both laughing, if you're not here and seeing us laugh, is because Marjorie excoriates me every day because we just added the 1 o'clock news.
We did.
Around Labor Day because that's what you all wanted. Now we're trying to give it to you.
No, it's because Jim wanted to go over and get a sandwich.
And Marjorie is
during
always
the 1 o'clock
yelling
news.
at me because I forget and I start speaking at 1 o'clock.
Yep.
And is it fair to say you forgot today that
I
you were
forgot.
supposed to
That's
speak?
right. I was chit-chatting. I was
and she
not
looked
paying
up
attention.
and said, uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
In any case,
Okay.
now we resolved that.
Now we resolved.
We're joined now by Carol Rose, Executive Director. She saw the whole thing, by the way. Executive Director of the Civil Liberties Union of Massachusetts. Carol, it's great to see you.
It's great to be here.
So, Carol, tell us about, a lot of us are hoping that the pro-choice forces will be a big factor in the election. I know the abortion is on the ballot in 10 states, but what do we think it's going to do for the election?
Well, I mean, abortion really is on the ballot, and bodily integrity is really on the ballot coming up. And, you know, as you said, it's on the ballot in like 10 states. So there's ballot initiatives in, let's say, Florida, there's Missouri, there's Nebraska, there's Arizona. And every time...
We should say only 2 states on the list of 10, which are swing states, which are Nevada and Arizona. The others matter, but they're not... They're either definitely red or definitely blue. But go ahead.
Although, I mean, it's interesting to say that, red versus blue, because in every place where abortion has been on the ballot, and we're talking about places like Kansas, Kentucky, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Wisconsin, the voters have overwhelmingly said, it's not for the government to decide what we do with our bodies. It's not up to the government. We shouldn't let the government do that. And every time it's been on the ballot, and this is because like the vast majority of people in this country don't think that the government should get involved in whether or not somebody needs abortion care or miscarriage care or IVF care or contraception. And so this is really an important moment for the country to decide, are we going to go forward and be able to have the government getting out of our bedrooms and out of our bodies, or are we going to go in the wrong direction?
By the way, let me be clear what I meant. I didn't mean that because it was in a red state, particularly based upon the history, that the pro-choice position would not prevail. I meant that even if it drew a huge amount of people out to a lot of these very conservative states, they're not all of a sudden going to vote for Kamala Harris, a majority, but they will draw more voters. However, the part of this that is so incredibly disturbing is how particularly Republican governors like DeSantis are reacting. I didn't know until he put together this election police thing to solve a problem that doesn't exist at all in Florida, but obviously it helped him. He thought to be president, he didn't quite make it. So from what we read, election police are going to the houses of people who signed the petition. They got 900,000 signatures to get the question on the ballot in Florida. According to some accounts, they come to the door to ask if this is your legitimate signature, even though no one is questioning the signature. And at least one person is in a story, I think in the New York Times, I'm not sure, saying, when the person came to my door, not only did they have a copy of the petition I did sign, they had a file with 10 pages of documentation on me that had nothing to do. So talk about voter intimidation.
That's exactly what it is. And, you know, this is why voting rights and reproductive justice and all these other issues are integrated. They're one and the same. And voting rights are the place right now where some of these anti-abortion authoritarian people are trying to stop it. So they're sending uniformed police officers to the homes of people who just simply signed a petition saying, I think it should be on the ballot. I mean, I don't even know how I'm going to vote on it. I just think it should be on the ballot. And the fact that he set up this police force and he's sending them door to door is just an egregious case of voter intimidation. And that's why groups like the ACLU are challenging that.
Are you? That was my question.
Absolutely.
And by the way, the point you made a minute ago in terms of small d democracy, the fact that you sign a petition, including in Massachusetts, to get a question on the ballot means you believe the public has a right to vote. We asked Charlie Baker to sign in our studio the millionaire's tax, which he passionately opposed, and he signed it. Because he thought the people had a right to vote. He signed it, and he voted against it. And
It's a form of direct democracy. And the ability to be on the ballot is to say that if, for example, we were to live in a state where the state legislature wasn't being effective in passing laws, the people taking it directly to the ballot, that's a way for the people to exercise their franchise in a different way other than necessarily by electing officials.
You know, Carol Rose, the abortion pills are very safe. We've known this for years, but sometimes there can be post-pill infections. And this is what happened to a mother of a 6-year-old in Georgia. This story is so upsetting. You explain what happened.
So this was a woman who, a 29-year-old woman. She had a 6-year-old child. She found out she had just moved out of her mother's basement. Finally was on her own, was getting going. Found out that she was pregnant and wasn't able to have that pregnancy. She didn't want to. She was pregnant with twins. She just didn't think it would be fair to her child or to herself or to her ability to go forward as a parent. And so she wanted to get an abortion, but she couldn't because of the ban on abortion care. She was just a couple days over the deadline, which I think is like 6 weeks. It's very, very
Georgia, did we say that?
It's Georgia, yeah. And so she decided she would have to go to another state. So she, went up to North Carolina, went up to North Carolina, so she could get abortion care. And she got a DNC, which was an abortion, a surgical abortion, and then they sent her back home. Well, as rarely happens, but sometimes happens, she started to bleed out. And so she couldn't get all the way back up to the Carolinas. So instead, she went to the hospital in Georgia. And the doctors were too afraid to treat her because they were afraid that they would be criminally prosecuted. And so she died. And it's just
died.
And leaving a 6-year-old without a mother. So this is the kind of thing, if people really cared about life, they would want people to get medical care. Abortion medication is safer than Viagra. It's safer than penicillin. And whatever any of us think personally about whether or not somebody should seek abortion care, it's not up to us, and it sure as heck shouldn't be up to the government. That is up to the patient and the provider in consultation with their families and with their religious people, whoever they want to talk to. But it shouldn't be a whole bunch of people in Washington trying to decide what we do with our bodies. It's just shameful, and this is just one of the many cases that we've had about people who have suffered miscarriages, and they weren't able to get care until they were bleeding out, who then lost the ability to have future children because they couldn't get the medical care.
Well, there's also another angle. I'm really embarrassed that I had not thought about this before. Some of the medical professionals in Georgia, most off the record for fear of being gone after, made the point that this whole thing that we often celebrate, well, at least they have an exception for the life of the mother. Right. These medical professionals were making the point is, I think it's necessary for the life of the mother. What happens if I perform the procedure and a court decides it wasn't necessary to save the life? I can be prosecuted. I could go to jail.
Criminally prosecuted.
So the value of that exception
is nil.
I mean, obviously it's better to have it than not to have it, because hopefully some doctors will decide I'll do the right thing because of that. But that is people have to be disabused, including me, about the value of that exception.
Right. It's not really an exception.
It raises the question, how close to death
do you have to be?
Does the woman have to be?
This woman, they left her bleeding out for 20 hours.
20 hours. I mean, it just drives me insane, because it is basically saying that women's lives are really not worth that much, because, if we're in some kind of childbearing state. I mean, it's just enraging.
Right. It is enraging, and it's wrong, and it's unfair. And that's why the vast majority of people across the country support the right to seek abortion care and miscarriage care and IVF if you want to, because
except
it's
the
about our
Republicans in the United States Senate, by the way, who voted down IVF yet again.
And the other thing is, as you point out in that situation, this woman just moved out of her mother's basement, and she couldn't afford to have another kid. Poverty is a major reason why people have abortions. I remember years ago, right after the terrible murders at the Planned Parenthood clinic and the other clinic in Brookline, I got to go there and interview a woman who was having an abortion there, and she was she came from New Hampshire. She was a mother. She had been on welfare, but she had a kid that was about 4 years old. She'd gotten her life together. She just got a job as a bus driver.
Right.
But her birth control failed. That's the other thing. People think, oh, everybody has birth control. Well, birth control fails. Even the birth control pill sometimes fail. And this woman was brokenhearted. She was brokenhearted, crying the whole time, but she could not afford to have this abortion. She just gotten a job. Right. And I remember she was so broke that she said she would forgo the cost of the anesthesia and had an abortion without any anesthesia, because it was going to cost her extra to get it. She misunderstood. They probably would have given it to her. But she had an abortion without anesthesia, and that is excruciating. And she cried the whole time.
Right. And on a personal level, to your point about the poverty, people are driven to seek abortion care not because they want to, but because they feel like it's a desperate act, and they will do it. And we know that before we had the protections of Roe versus Wade, people did seek so-called back alley abortions. And my father was a medical examiner.
I didn't know that. Where was he a medical examiner?
Out in Iowa. And he
Are you from Iowa?
I'm actually from Virginia, Texas, and Iowa, and California. I moved.
Wow.
And now Boston is my home by choice for the
Nice.
longest period of time.
But go ahead, I'm sorry.
But he became very active in supporting Planned Parenthood and reproductive justice and things because so many people were coming into the morgue. And he was outraged by all these young people coming into the morgue, young women coming into the morgue who had died. And so he became very active in this.
Self-induced abortion efforts.
Because when someone is desperate enough, they will find a way, whether it's safe or unsafe. And if it isn't safe and legal, then people will find a way to do it that will put themselves at harm and put their families at harm. And the case in Georgia that we were just talking about, there's now a 6-year-old who doesn't have a parent.
Yeah.
I mean, how horrible is that? So anybody who, again, people can agree about their own personal views on this, but the notion that the government should be making this decision for us is just simply wrong, and I think the vast majority of the voters know that it's wrong. And that's why wherever it comes up, the people, whether it's in Kansas or Kentucky or Massachusetts, the vast majority of people don't want the government to be involved in these decisions.
That was one of Kamala Harris' best lines. You do not have to abandon your faith to think that the government should not be the person making these decisions. Donald Trump should not be the person making these moral decisions.
Exactly.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, especially since he doesn't really give a damn about it to begin with.
does not.
Which is the worry. So can we get back to this life of the mother thing for a second? So you're in a state where there are great limitations on the right to choose. There is an exception for the life of the mother. A doctor, a medical professional goes to the Civil Liberties Union and says exactly what I said or what they said in Georgia before. I know that if we don't provide services to this woman, she's going to die. But I'm worried that when I do it, someone's going to challenge and say she wouldn't have died and get some crackpot expert to go after me. What does the Civil Liberties Union do for that person?
Right. So we have a hotline, a abortion legal defense hotline. We have one here in Massachusetts that's through the Attorney General's office, but we have a national ACLU abortion defense hotline. So if there is anyone
through the
out
Civil
there,
Liberties Union?
through the ACLU, that's right, the national ACLU at aclu.org. And if there are providers or patients or anyone else who has a question about that, they can call the hotline because each individual circumstance is going to be different. But we have lawyers, both criminal defense lawyers and civil rights lawyers standing by who are able to both answer your questions and, if necessary, provide representation.
Fair enough. We're talking to Carol Rose, head of the Civil Liberties Union of Massachusetts. Let's stay on the bad news front for a couple of minutes before we talk about some of the good work that your organization is doing. I mentioned to a caller before at the top of the show, I didn't mean to jump down his throat, but I did, because he was talking about how he heard a podcast where he felt much better about the security of the election and the ability to essentially protect the true vote. And I said, whoever said that is BS. And the example I gave was Georgia, where there is an attempt to they're already being put in place, election officials whose avowed purpose is to challenge certification of voting results if they show that Kamala Harris won. So in their county and their district and whatever the hell it is, in which case, I don't understand the mechanism there, but this is not just Georgia, it's in a number of places, most egregiously there. Even the Republican governor is anxious and upset about some of these things. What would happen if there's a failure to certify at a certain date? The legislature, overwhelmingly Republican, would say Donald Trump won, whether he won or not. Obviously, the Harris forces would appeal. It would go to the Supreme Court of the United States. And even though they did the right thing last round on cases around Trump, who the hell knows in light of what they've done. So in light of the fact that the most important, well, first of all, explain what pre-clearance was that was done away with in the Shelby case, I think in 2013 or something. Explain that, what it was, now that it's gone, and what you do and your colleagues do to ensure that a situation like I described doesn't allow the Supreme Court to pick the president.
Right. Okay. So Shelby County was a case that challenged the pre-clearance section of the Voting Rights Act. So the Voting Rights Act, when it was passed under LBJ, said that when there are states primarily the states in the South that have a history of oppressing voting rights, of discriminating against people and preventing people from exercising their right to vote, that if they want to change the rules, they first have to get pre-clearance. They have to be cleared by the government, by the federal government, to say what you're doing doesn't violate people's rights. Okay, so when the Shelby County case came in, they challenged that, and it was a decision by John Roberts, Chief Justice John Roberts, that said, oh, well, racism is over in America. Like, we don't have a problem with
this anymore,
we don't need this anymore. And they got rid of the pre-clearance requirement, and that was Article 5 of the Voting Rights Act. So the only thing that was left was Article 2, which says if after the fact something bad happens, then you can sue.
But it's already happened.
But it's already happened, and it's kind of too late. So that's what they did when they got rid of the pre-clearance requirement. So that really made it harder for groups like the ACLU and other voting rights groups to try to challenge these efforts to deny people the right to vote through these various mechanisms that you're talking about. So whether it's things like voter ID requirements, or you can't, there are fewer voting places, so people have to stand in line for hours. In Georgia, they actually tried to prevent people from giving water to people.
That was the whole year of Curb Your Enthusiasm was about Larry David giving somebody water in line in Georgia, the whole season.
Right, exactly. So that has limited our ability to prevent the kind of shenanigans that you're talking about, Jim. However, the ACLU nationwide, both here in Massachusetts and nationwide, has mobilized a huge number of volunteers and also lawyers to go into every state to go and be neutral, nonpartisan poll watchers, because the ACLU is nonpartisan. We have lawyers who are on call with the hotline that I was talking about if these things take place. We are challenging these voting restrictions, and I think 11 different states right now. We have pending and ongoing lawsuits in all these different states. So we're throwing everything we have at it. We're putting a huge number of resources in it. However, that doesn't mean that we're going to win those cases, right? And so I think there really is a legitimate danger that you're talking about, that some of this stuff is going to happen, and that our democracy is really on the line. So it's tremendously important that people turn out. Both here in Massachusetts, it doesn't matter what happens in Massachusetts. Yes, it does. It actually matters a lot. And so we need to vote in every state. We need to get people out to vote in every state. And we'll be sending people from Massachusetts, from our team, also into some of these battleground states to make sure that it's a free and fair election to the extent that we can. But you never know.
Before we talk about something else you put out, this election action plan, which will be of value to people. So Marjorie, through the years, despite the Shelby decision, which we just talked about, written by Roberts, you have said you held out hope that Roberts was the sane voice in the conservative majority. What did you read in the New York Times this weekend?
I read a piece about him last Sunday, which was just an eye-opener about really this is all part of his plan, that the Roberts court is this is what he wants.
The unitary executive. It's giving all of this incredible power. It's in effect creating a king instead of a president. And it's so dangerous and it's so destructive to our democracy.
And it's very, people always talk about activist judges. I mean, my God.
It's the most
It's the most activist court we've had in decades. So that was very upsetting. Why are you asking me that?
Well, I'm saying because we just mentioned that the Shelby case, which was a huge case in terms of voting rights, was Roberts. And by the way, I wasn't criticizing. I subscribed to the same school you did.
Too.
That for his preservation of the Affordable Care Act was right.
All that kind of
but in fact, he's the driving force, not just Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito.
Is this a prefix to the story about the Supreme Court picking the next president?
No, we just talked about it. No, it's not a prefix. It's an afterfix. We talked about this, and that's it.
Okay.
So let's end with some good news. What the hell? What is this election action? What is this thing?
So I just have to say, over the summer, the ACLU, both here in Massachusetts and we were in every state across the country, have been working on election action plans to make sure that we can do whatever we can to engage the people in ensuring free and fair elections. And here in Massachusetts, we have a 5-point plan that people can look at ACLUM.org. If they want to get involved, they can sign up to be neutral poll watchers, get out the vote. So the elements of the plan are first to build people power between now and Election Day. And we've been doing this now for more than a year. We're working in 5 communities that are often underrepresented: Brockton, Pittsfield, Springfield, Lawrence, and Worcester. And we're going door to door, and we're talking to people about the importance of voting and how they can get involved and engaged, not only at the federal level, but in their school boards and in their, town meeting and in state legislative races. So really trying to get people to engage, because I've said this before, democracy is a muscle. And the more you exercise it, the stronger it gets. The second thing is monitoring and protecting the polls. Again, the ACLU is nonpartisan, but we are training people. So if you're interested in being a poll watcher here in Massachusetts, you can sign up at ACLUM.org. The third is to safeguard free expression and political speech. We've had a number of instances of people calling in and saying that when they tried to put a political lawn sign out, town officials said they weren't allowed to put up political signs. So you are allowed to put up political signs. And so just so people know that. So there's a lot of free speech things we're looking at. We're doing Know Your Rights trainings.
Political signs, what are the rules though? Is it your own property or
on your own property?
On your own property.
On your own property.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just want to be clear.
And then we're making sure people know their rights. We're doing a series of Know Your Rights training. So it's Know Your Rights if you're an immigrant, know your rights around reproductive health care, know your rights around voting rights, know your rights around protest and freedom of speech. So if people are interested in having their group or learning about how they can join and know your rights training, we have those going on.
Does that include knowing your rights about migrating to Canada in December? Or
Jim, we'll do a tutorial for you.
We'll do a separate one. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry. Continue. I just wanted to check.
And then the last thing is really talking about how we're going to shore up civil rights and civil liberties, whatever happens. You know, the ACLU has been around for over 100 years, started here in Massachusetts, and we're in all 50 states, and we've been through 19 presidents. And so presidents come and go, but the ACLU stays. And so one of the things that we're already starting to look at is what are the steps that we can take so that if Trump takes power, what are the steps that we can take to protect democracy here in Massachusetts? And if Harris gets in power, what are the things we can do to make sure that we never go to this place again? Because I don't think it's right for our democracy every 4 years to have the democracy itself this close to the edge. I think we need to find ways, structural, whether it's ending the filibuster, ranked choice voting, national popular vote. There are a lot of mechanistic things, systemic things we can do, and that's one of the things the ACLU has been working on here in Massachusetts and across the country.
ACLUM.org to get a copy of that.
ACLUM.org.
Two questions before you go, briefly if we can. This is sort of what can you do to help? This is the same question I asked you around the medical professional. Poll, you said if you want to be a neutral poll observer. Okay, so we know what happened. We talked about them earlier today to Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, the mother and daughter in Georgia, whose lives were totally destroyed, their lives threatened because they were doing their job responsibly and for I don't think, for no money. Right. We know Giuliani and a president of the United States attacked them and their lives were just totally destroyed. They did win $100 and some million judgment against Rudy Giuliani, thank goodness.
I don't think he's paid him anything.
He hasn't yet, no, but he hasn't yet, that is correct. We know that 16 states' election divisions, including Massachusetts, had suspicious envelopes delivered to them in the last 24 hours. We know that Vance, Trump et al., the New Hampshire Libertarian Party, make threats as part of their MO. What do you say to somebody who says, I really want to do this, I really believe in democracy, I want to help, but frankly, I'm scared that I'm the next in line for the kind of treatment that guy on the radio just described?
It's a legitimate question, and I would just say that freedom isn't free. People throughout the history of this country have fought and died to save our democracy, and this is our turn. This is our turn. These forces against democracy aren't new. We've seen them. I mean, we had a civil war, over those. But every time there has been a threat to our democracy, whether it's the Civil War or Joe McCarthy or any other time, there have been people who stood up and risked their lives, often gave their lives to defend our democracy. Well, this is our turn. This is our moment in history, and I sure hope that our country survives it.
Beautifully put. Before you go, very quickly, just to preview our next discussion, how do you feel about liverwurst?
Not a fan, Jim.
Oh, what?
I have limits on what I think should be allowed.
Yeah. How about head cheese? That's another.
But you're really not a fan of liverwurst? I'm so disappointed.
People in my office often refer to me as the head cheese. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's good or bad, Carol. I don't know. Thank you very much.
Despite that position, thank you for being here. We appreciate it. Carol Rose.
Speaking with Carol Rose, Executive Director of the American Civil Liberties Union of Massachusetts.
Easy for you to say.
Up next, this concludes the serious news portion of the show. Thank God.
What are you talking about, serious news?
Well, I think
I would say this is serious for some of us.
Concerned as you are
well,
about the liverwurst crisis facing America.
Liverwurst crisis.
We now enter the absurd because, of course, Jim is upset with Boar's Head because they've ended production of
That's correct.
the liverwurst that goes into the liverwurst sandwich, which Jim really likes. You remember there was a listeria outbreak at the Boar's Head plant. We're going to open the lines to ask you about other disgusting foods that you might like or not like, slippery foods. meat jelly, head cheese, the aforementioned.
You didn't even know what head cheese was.
I didn't. I never heard of head
ago.
cheese. And after I read about it, I'm glad I didn't know anything about it because I will never eat it. Anyway, you are listening to Boston Public Radio 89.7 GBH, live from the Boston Public Library and streaming online at youtube.com/GBH News.
I'm Jared Bowen. Coming up on The Culture Show, NEACAP. The Belfast-based rap group, known for their fiery political commentary, is returning to Boston for a sold-out show at Paradise. We catch up with them to talk about their debut album and film, a music-filled biopic that tracks their origin story with a mix of provocation and irony. Plus, Grammy-nominated composer Carlos Simon joins us to talk about being the BSO's inaugural composer chair. That's on The Culture Show today at 2 on 89.7 GBH.
Our programs are made possible thanks to you.
And Central Square Theater with The Hound of the Baskervilles, a hilarious adaptation of the Sherlock Holmes mystery with 3 actors playing more than a dozen roles in this laugh-out-loud farce. Now playing, centralsquaretheater.org. And Massachusetts Maritime Academy, the Commonwealth's leadership university. They offer a hands-on learning environment, helping to prepare their students to be global leaders in careers on land or at sea. Maritime.edu.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jim Browdy and Marge Regan. We're live at the Boston Public Library and streaming at youtube.com/GBH News. It's actually hard for me to even read the following sentence, but I'm going to power my way through it. In the wake of a listeria outbreak at the Boar's Head production plants, the company has announced, you ready for this? Permanently discontinuing liverwurst production. Now, for anyone under the age of, let's say, 50, liverwurst is actually sort of a pate. Very fancy, very nutritious. And yes, I'm not minimizing. 9 people did die because of this outbreak. They should obviously fix the problem. Dozens were hospitalized. But don't I deserve to eat what I want? So am I the only person who's devastated by this news? Marjorie obviously is not. What will I have to eat now? Olive loaf, Marjorie? Head cheese?
Olive loaf.
Vienna sausages in a can? The lines are open. We want to ask you about, as Marjorie calls it, the slippery foods that you love that others can't stand. What gross food, at least to some, does it for you like liverwurst does it for me?
Apparently, Jim, a lot of people are big liverwurst fans.
It's fabulous.
That listen to our show. Liverwurst is one of the few things I ever agree with Jim Browdy on.
Thank you.
Nothing like a liverwurst, an onion sandwich with spicy mustard, says Art from West Bridgewater. Caden from Sudbury, I'm a devoted liverwurst fan. My order, 8 slices of liverwurst cut on a 3.5, separated by papers, please. Oh, I get it. Separated
so it
by
doesn't
papers.
all stick together, yeah.
Yeah. Karen from Manchester, I have adored liverwurst since I was in the 1st grade. Wow.
So can I get back to Art from West Bridgewater?
Yes.
And thank you, Art, for your enlightened email, even though it's slightly off. The dream sandwich for some of us, which you should try if you weren't so small-minded on this, is you toast a piece of bread. Let's say rye bread, for example. You smear, as he says, spicy mustard on it. My choice is Dijon. You slice a red onion thinly. You put a blob, don't laugh, a blob of liverwurst on it, and possibly, this is what Art left out, maybe a slice of Swiss cheese on top of the thing.
Swiss cheese.
And I would say that is one of the finest sandwiches ever. By the way, you shouldn't even be part of this.
I thought you were
can't even eat
Grey Poupon.
I am. Well, I am a Grey Poupon. That's
Grey
Dijon
Poupon.
mustard. That is Grey Poupon.
It
doesn't have to be.
Okay.
That's a brand.
Will you say it for me, please?
Grey Poupon. Now, I took French 4 years.
Grey Poupon.
Poupon, thank you. Now, Marjorie, since
Yes.
I said what I love that a lot of people find disgusting, but it is at the top of my list of favorites, what do a lot of people love that you find disgusting? Or the reverse, what do you love that a lot of other people find disgusting? Go ahead.
Well, I don't like things like raw oysters or clams.
Because they're the slimy foods.
Yeah, the slimy, slippery food. I certainly don't like that thing you mentioned before, that olive loaf thing. Oh, my God.
Well, let me tell you, head cheese. Let's talk about head cheese for a second.
Head cheese is disgusting.
Before we take calls. Now, first of all, I never say this word on the air, but I'm going to say it now, so hide the kids.
Yep.
If you've never seen head cheese, who hadn't seen it? You hadn't seen it, or Jamie, somebody?
I never knew there's any such thing
Can I
as
tell you,
head cheese.
it looks like, and I apologize, it looks like sliced vomit. That's what it, no, I'm sorry, but
Thank you.
Jamie told me how to say that. Now, here's a description of head cheese. You ready?
Yep.
It's made of pig scraps that primarily come from an animal's head.
Yes.
The tongue, the snout, the cheek, the ears, sometimes the heart, and if they're feeling wild, the feet. And they combine, there's like a jellied kind of thing within the slices of the, and there are, by the way, if you go to a deli, which I don't think you do nearly as much as I do, head cheese is a fairly popular thing with a certain demographic.
Well, it's thank you. I
you're
will
welcome.
not be rushing off to get any of that kind of stuff too. You know, one of the other things I think that people think is disgusting are those jelly molds. You know, that you mentioned before, jelly molds. You know, where they have the little things in the middle of the jelly.
Yeah, but no one makes
around.
that since our grandmothers died.
No, they do. They do.
Still?
Absolutely. Some people are still making.
How about Spam? Does that fall in that category?
Spam is
Some
kind of
people
like liverwurst.
Hawaiians swear by it. Well, there's also the Hawaiians swear by. You know the Spam Museum? We've talked about this a lot. It's in
Spam
Minnesota.
Museum, yes, I do.
We haven't done that. Now, apparently, on this list of things, something that a lot of people like, and I don't know if you do. Lamb's testicles. Have you ever had lamb's testicles?
No, I have not. But one of the things I remember when I was a little kid that my
What? That's true, by
grandfather
the way, yeah.
used to eat pig's feet, and you'd see them in the glass jars.
How do you eat a pig?
I don't know.
How do you eat
I don't
pig's
know.
feet?
And you see the little hooves in there, and it was just disgusting. And I don't know what he did with them, but he ate them. Like,
Okay,
it's
so
gross.
you don't like oysters because
I
they're
do not.
slimy. I will tell you a kind of oyster
Yep.
that is not slimy that a lot of people like. Do you know what a Rocky Mountain oyster is?
I think it's something.
Who said, oh,
I think it's something.
thank you.
Also something.
You ever had
gross.
one? You've had one? They're fabulous. I can tell by the look on your face.
Yeah.
She's the happiest I've ever seen her.
I think
here.
they're somebody else's testicles, aren't they?
They're bull's testicles.
Bull's
They
testicles,
are.
there you go.
It's an acquired taste, I think, is the bottom line. 877-301-8970. So there are two choices here. What is the food that you love that other people consider disgusting? In my case, it's liverwurst. Or the food that other people love that you consider disgusting, like oysters from Marjorie.
Listen to this from a texter.
What?
Pickled pimento loaf is the filet mignon of deli meat.
Pimento loaf is like olive loaf. It has olives in the damn loaf, and it's actually quite fine.
Okay. Some people object apparently to clam pizza. They don't want to have
I love
clams
clam
on top of their
pizza.
pizza. They think that's terrible. We'll take some calls. Dave in the car, thank you for calling.
Hello, Dave.
Hey, long time, many times.
Thank you.
Jim, I'm gonna save your day.
Please.
I've never had boar's head liverwurst, but I buy it all the time at Market Basket, and it's Oscar Mayer makes it, and it's pretty darn good.
It is.
You know, they have it in the tube, they have it in slices. It's a beautiful thing.
Well, Dave, don't go away. I wasn't going to bring this up because I thought Marjorie was upset already, but since you're a pro liverwurst tube kind of person, one of the great joys, Marjorie, you should try this too, is if you get a tube of liverwurst, you cut a small hole in the end and you squeeze it and shoot it right into your mouth. Have you ever done that?
Oh, right on, brother. I'm right there with you.
Dave, you are my guy. What?
The other thing I wanted to add was one thing I really hate is blood sausage. I don't know if you've ever had
I don't like
God.
that. Horrible. No, I'm with you on that. I don't like that
Does
either.
Dave like him or not like him?
No, he hates them.
Oh, he hates
says.
them, okay.
That was an excellent call, Dave. Call us again. Thank you very
You
much.
ever heard of lox trimmings?
Yeah. But you know what lox is?
I know what lox and bagels.
What? Oh, my God. Look what Aiden has. By the way, Marjorie,
Liverwurst.
do you care
liverwurst?
about our listeners?
Yeah, I see the liverwurst right
So
there.
why don't you have a little taste?
I'm not going
right?
to have any.
Why not?
No, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that.
Where'd you get that,
Yeah.
Aiden? Where'd you go?
It's the last of the boar's head.
Oh, great. It's the last of the boar's head, Aiden says. Even I may pass on that. By the way, they closed down the whole damn plant. Is that plant, by the way, for whatever it's worth, you don't know this either. When it comes to cold cuts, other than cold cuts that are freshly made cold cuts, like go to Mamala's or something in Brookline,
No, I'm
or
not
in
having that.
Cambridge, or in I'll
No,
take it.
not-
I'm happy to
You
take
can
it.
give
I'll
it
take
to-
it.
you can give it- no,
You
no,
are
I'm
so
not doing that.
small-minded. It's unbelievable.
Oh, my
What-
God.
Okay,
It's
and as I
like-
was saying,
it looks like it's shiny or something. It's
boar's head was the
geez.
cream of the crop when it comes to deli meats.
I always thought boar's head was very good.
Very good.
Sliced turkey, sliced chicken.
I mean, you
That's
do
what-
run the risk of dying, but that
well,
is...
no. They've
Thank
shut
you.
them
It's
the
the
plant, Jim.
happiest
I
I've
think
ever
they're
been. Thank
acting
you.
responsibly there.
Oh, Jones. Oh, Jones. This is not even, what do you call it? It's not even
It's not boar's
boar's
head.
head, so it's fine. I'm
No,
going to eat some.
go
Thank
ahead,
you, Aiden. It's
Jim.
very kind of you. I'm doing it in a minute.
Okay, go crazy. Meanwhile, let's go to Tamara in the car. Hi, Tamara.
Hey, tomorrow. We're talking liverwurst. Well, hi.
Hey guys, how are you?
Good.
Fine, thank you.
So Wait, do I need to turn my radio down?
You do.
Yes, you do.
You
That
do.
would be good.
You do.
That would be good, yeah.
We've only been doing that for like 70 years on call-in, so there's no reason you
Tomorrow's
would know.
first-time caller.
No, she's not.
So you ready? What do you deal?
Hi.
What's your deal with liverwurst
Okay, now you're
tomorrow?
back. Hello there, tomorrow.
What do you think?
Okay. So I want to tell you that there are three things that I love. One is liverwurst.
Thank you.
Jim, you're trying to get all hipster on me, putting it on rye bread. It's got to be on Wonder bread.
A lot of people
Wonder
think
bread.
that. A lot of people think that. Yeah. Go ahead.
Wonder bread, and with white onion, yellow mustard, and a slice of slimy American cheese.
Yeah. No, you're
Okay.
right. I was
Okay.
being a feat. Go ahead.
Or you've got fried spam on Wonder bread, or fried bologna on Wonder bread. But I would like to say that I am the executive director of a farm that grows food for food pantries in Central Mass, organic vegetables. But I will still go for a slice of spam once in a while.
Now, what's the name of your operation? We want to give you a little lift there. What's the name of your place?
That's awesome. It's called Overlook Farm. It's in Rutland, Mass.
Oh, I've heard of that.
We donated 2,600 pounds this summer to 7 food pantries in Central Mass.
That's
By the way, do you want to say who owns Overlook Farm?
Actually, we're a nonprofit, so we're not owned. It's right next to where Heifer used to be, and now it's Lilac Head Start. But you guys should have us on with a bunch of other farms that are giving back and growing food for who can't buy fresh vegetables. It's a pretty special place.
We stay on the line, and the only reason I'm doing this is not because of your wonderful work, but because you like liverwurst. So stay on the hold, and we'll take your contact information, and we'll be in touch. Thank you, Tamara, very much for your call. We appreciate it.
Kevin from New Hampshire loves canned fish, herring, mackerel, sardines.
Yeah, that can be
Less
hard.
than a handful of people have even tried it. Very healthy for you, he says. Richard in Rosendale, I am all about pickled herring. Love it on pumpernickel, love it on Triscuits. Chris from Belmont, spicy scrapple. There you go.
You know what scrapple is, by the way?
I don't know. It's some
That's
gross
mostly
thing.
like a Pennsylvania kind of thing that is not, people get upset when I say this, it's not unlike Spam, but I would say it's a Pennsylvania variety, which is a lot easier. I don't mean this is a pun to stomach, so thank you for that.
Okay, we're getting the climate change argument here. Liverwurst aside, beef is one of the major causes of global warming. None of us should eat it. Pig farms accumulate the urine of the animals in a big pond on site and then empty it by spraying the contents over nearby areas, usually the homes of low-income people. Oh my God, that's Laura in Cohasset. That sounds absolutely horrible. And that's about, jarred filter fish? That's the thing you eat?
Filet, no.
Gefilte?
Gefilte fish, Marjorie, not
you eat
filter
that.
fish.
You eat that. Well, that's what the texture
Gefilte
said.
fish is mostly a thing that I would say Jewish people eat.
Yeah.
And gefilte fish is like ground up pike. It is then formed into a ball. And it is generally, this part you'll like, by the way, it is generally in a jar with jelly surrounding
that sounds
the
delicious.
jar. And I have to say, I want to be open-minded about this.
Yeah.
It is very hard to eat a piece of gefilte fish straight. The key to gefilte fish, as I've tried to teach you in the 25 years I've known you, look at, Jamie, that's not helpful. Jamie's making a face. You get red horseradish, which contrasts with the gray color of the gefilte fish, and you bathe the gefilte fish in red horseradish, and then you eat the combo.
Okay, that sounds wonderful.
By the way, the reason why I asked that woman
It
about
sounds
Overlook
wonderful.
Farm, I confused
I've heard of
it.
Overlook Farm.
No, you heard of what I've heard of, which is Lookout Farm.
Oh, Lookout Farm.
Which is owned by some of the great people who have ever lived, the Belkins, who, by the way, are fans of the show and are among the most philanthropic people on the planet.
A lot of people are writing about filter fish,
Do you know we
Jim.
ate dinner at their house, by the way? Do you know that? They bid for us in an auction, and you said it was one of the best nights of your life.
Is there also something called
She has no idea what I'm talking about.
Filter fish?
No, gefilte fish.
Maybe they're just spelling it wrong.
Maybe they are.
Maybe it's automatic correcting with a typewriter or something like that. Okay, let's go
By the way,
Ron.
let me just say, be clear, so if you don't think, I would, herring out of a jar, I would rather be waterboarded than have that. So I'm not into all sorts of odd and disgusting food.
Okay, well, that's good to know, Jim.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Here's someone that says crawfish and sucking the meat juices out of the head.
That's fabulous.
Doesn't get any better than that.
That is fabulous. Crayfish, too.
Crayfish, whatever they are.
Whatever they are.
Rod from Seabrook, thank you for
calling.
calling.
Hey, Ron, liverwurst, what do you think?
Hi, thanks for taking my call. Marjorie, I'm glad you're feeling better.
Thank you.
So am I.
I enjoy liverwurst. I enjoy liverwurst a lot. I acknowledge that it's bad for me. I buy like 2 slices at a time. Make
I'm
one
eating it
sandwich
now.
and then
Yeah, go ahead.
Don't do it.
Yeah.
Don't. Well, the main thing I wanted to say is
What is it?
I have an objection to just about anyone who states, I hate that or I love that
too.
without personal experience.
Marjorie, exactly. He's talking to you.
All right. Well, I'm looking at that
Go ahead.
mound of liverwurst on my plate.
Keep going.
I'm not,
You're doing great,
I'm not
Ron.
doing it.
Go ahead.
Not doing it.
Well, so just a last little thing. My
Please.
dad raised us to try everything. He had an incurable sweet tooth, and believe it or not, if he had a liverwurst sandwich, it was in with the peanut butter and jelly.
Oh.
And I have 2 brothers and sisters that still do that to this day.
Beautiful family, beautiful people.
Oh.
Thank you. Ron, that was a lovely story. Now, Marjorie, this may move you beyond the embarrassment that Ron caused you by saying you shouldn't criticize something you haven't tried. I just ate a half piece of a slice of the Jones Braunschweiger liverwurst, and it is nothing short of spectacular. That's number one.
That's good. That's good,
Liverwurst, Marjorie, can be a good source of healthy fats, amino acids, minerals, and vitamins, including vitamin A and vitamin B12.
Well, that's just swell, Jim.
So does that change your mind at all, or
no? It does not. I'm moving it away from me on the table,
Well,
actually.
that is childish. That is
it
really
looks very
childish.
slippery.
It's not slippery.
Let's go to Mark in Salem. What do you think, Mark?
Hey.
Move it my way. I'm ready to dive right in.
Move it my way.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mark.
I grew up in the 70s down in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Jim.
Ooh.
Anyway, there was a children's book called A Cricket in Times Square.
Oh.
Some of your listeners know it.
Yeah.
It's George Selden. I think it was a Newbery Award winning. The mouse, the little mouse, was their friend's mouse, a cricket. The mouse loved liverwurst. And so I was already sort of primed to love it. When I first tasted it, I thought, here's that Tucker mouse or whatever who loved that liverwurst. And it is heavenly. I'm with you, Jim. You can always, whatever portions you're not eating, you can mail them up here to Salem, and, particularly during the month of October.
Another beautiful person. Hey, Mark, don't go away. Don't go away.
Right.
I described, I have to admit, I was politely criticized by that caller. I described the toasted rye, Dijon, red onion,
Grey Poupon,
Swiss variety, Grey Poupon. That's
Grey
right.
Poupon.
The caller talked about Wonder Bread, a white onion, horrible American cheese, and liverwurst on it. Which do you prefer, Mark?
Oh, either way, but I love the junky version of it. Freierhofer's bakery bread, Stroman's, if you can't do Wonder, which was cooked up or baked right in my area of Harrisburg when I was living in that area too. Either way, I mean, a Vidalia onion is a primo, but a regular white onion will just do fine.
You are one of the smartest callers we've ever had, Mark. Thank you very much for your call. We really appreciate it.
Now, people want you to read the ingredients from liverwurst.
I'd be happy
so we all
to.
know what it is.
I'd be happy to.
Yes.
They're all. Here's what it has. This is on the Jones's Braunschweiger liverwurst. Marjorie, you ready? Pork, livers, pork, bacon. And the bacon is cured with all good things: sodium phosphate, sodium ascorbate, sodium something else, potassium lactate. Is that good for you? I think it is. Water, salt, spices, dehydrated onions, sodium diacetate, sodium ascorbate, sugar, and sodium nitrate. So
there you go.
essentially,
Sounds delicious.
It's organic.
It's very organic. That's right. Very natural.
It's organic.
Underwood deviled
Natural,
ham. Here's one. I remember having that when I was a kid.
ham.
Underwood deviled ham.
Too. I hate that.
Canned sardines. A lot of gefilte fish fans. Gefilte fish is a horseradish delivery system. According to my grandmother, the reason for the red horseradish over white horseradish is because she used to grate it by hand. Oh, and it got a little bloody, so beet juice was added for that?
That is
oh, no.
By the way, it is made red by beet juice. That is correct.
Is Marjorie getting Jim the Liverwurst of the Month Club this Christmas time? Maybe I should. Be a lot cheaper than the other ones.
Can I be more positive than I usually am?
Yep.
I was very close-minded. When I saw that my favorite liverwurst, which was boar's head, was being permanently banned, in a small-minded way, I was angry at Boar's Head. And then what I did, which is sort of what Aiden helped us with Jones, I went to Market Basket on Saturday, right after they announced the closure, and I went to the liverwurst.
Closure?
The closure of their production of, not market basket, of liverwurst at Boar's Head.
But you meant market
I went
basket.
to the section that has liverwurst in it, naively thinking it'd be empty because Boar's Head is gone. There's a plethora of different kinds.
A plethora.
I said that. A plethora
of liverwurst.
Of different kinds.
With Grey Poupon.
Well, you don't have to have it with Grey Poupon. It's sad they did not have the Grey Poupon right above the liverwurst so that you have
the
a
guy
combo.
in the Rolls Royce of the ads? He's got the Grey Poupon.
It was a good spot.
Going around the neighborhood looking for people to have Grey Poupon. Listen to this one. Pickled lamb's tongue on crackers.
Yeah.
That's from Tom from New Hampshire.
You know that tongue is also one of my favorite foods?
I did not know that,
It
Jim.
is cow's tongue.
Jim, I have 3 words for you. Chopped chicken livers.
Well, it's the best. You don't like chopped chicken liver either?
Actually, I had those when I was a kid.
Yeah, do you know where you've had chopped chicken liver? Not chopped, but chicken liver?
I know, at the
Golden Temple
in
had,
Brookline.
I don't know if they have them anymore.
I don't know if they do
Chinese
either.
restaurant, they have stir-fried chicken livers. Doesn't get any better.
Now, Nathan Wister says that, there are things such as gefilte fish or filter fish, generally known as bottom feeders, carp, catfish, etc. So maybe filter fish is different than gefilte fish. How do you spell gefilte fish?
Gefilte.
Okay, there seems to be some confusion.
Well, maybe
here.
they just can't spell. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No wonder Jim is always getting his organs scanned.
That's really. Why is that so amusing to you, Margaret?
I find it a riot.
Okay, fine.
Okay, let's go to
Now, by the way,
Laura.
some texters are criticizing us because we went from a really wonderful discussion about 50 years since busing to liverwurst. And
well, we're versatile,
that was
Jim. Versatile.
Reversal. That's right. I mean, it was not a smooth transition.
It was not a smooth transition. Laura in South Dartmouth, thank you
Hi,
for
Laura.
calling.
What's up?
Hi, I'm a first-time caller.
Oh.
I had to pull over on the side of the road. Actually, I'm in a nice little place because I got so excited. I love all the food, pretty much, not pimento love, all the food that you have mentioned so far. I have eaten pig's feet, pickled pig's feet.
Oh.
I know exactly what they are. A cow's tongue is divine.
Now, hold on for a second. What do you do with the pickled pig's feet? Because
how do you eat
all
it?
I could see was the hooves in the glass jar.
I think they're just, so I have a German father, and that's why I know weird food. And
Yeah.
I'm getting to the one I can't find in Massachusetts. I grew up in Iowa. So, pickled pig's feet, he would just eat, and I have too, just out of a jar.
Oh,
but
God.
Yeah.
Laura, how do you feel
Yeah.
about head cheese? How do you feel about head cheese?
I've never had it.
Oh, that's sad.
I know. Tell me. But we used to fight like some things. Like we raised our cows, and Mom and the daughters, 5 sisters, and I would fight over who could eat the liver or who could get the liver.
Wish I was part of that family.
Yeah.
Laura, let me ask you something, Laura. Have you been listening to
This is a tough connection.
yeah, one quick thing. Have you been listening to the show for a while?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's a question for you. You're listening to Boston Public Radio, and you hear a woman call in who says she's been listening to the show for a while, and this is the first time she pulled over to the side of the road to talk about olive loaf and liverwurst. What would you think of that person? Exactly.
Yeah, she's a little different.
Go ahead.
It's okay. But I got so excited because I love this kind of food. And so, we go to Robert Burns celebrations every February. We celebrate his birthday, the Scottish poet. And I love haggis. That's why I go.
Oh.
I love haggis.
We've discussed that too.
And, okay. But whoever answered the phone when I called said, Jim might be able to help me with this. So ever since I've moved out to Massachusetts, I cannot find Limburger cheese.
What?
Limburger cheese.
Limburger cheese.
I would try
Correct.
Formaggio, not that I'm an expert. And actually, Whole Foods has a lot of cheese things. We'll check it out, Laura. Keep listening. That was an excellent first call.
Now,
and we'll try to solve your problem
I
for
do
you.
want to
Laura,
say,
thanks for the call.
I've been reading through the text, and many people find that liverwurst brings them back to their childhood.
Me too.
When I was a child, staying with my grandmother, she'd sometimes say, "You have been such a good girl today. We're going to get some luscious liverwurst for lunch." As a child, I did not like it. but it made me think of my grandmother, and sometimes I eat liverwurst and remember being special. And my grandmother. And here's somebody else who said, while not a lover of liverwurst myself, this segment brought me right back to memories of my mother, who died about 10 years ago. I see her sitting at the kitchen table with her liverwurst sandwich on rye, white onion, and mustard. Thank you for the memories.
Doesn't that almost make
Isn't
you
that
cry
lovely?
when you think about that?
Yeah.
By the way, we've made a decision, Jamie and I, while you were reading those, talked about, we have a lot of wonderful things scheduled for tomorrow.
Yep.
Marjorie's going to tell you what it would have been. We've canceled all the guests. We're going to do 3 hours on liverwurst and head cheese tomorrow because we're not going to be able to get to all of your calls.
Okay.
So we have a hell of a show.
Well, I would say we have a lot of people who really love.
You want to make me happy?
Yes.
Why can't you take
because it's
one
gross.
small
I'm
bite?
not going to do it. No.
What is gross about it?
It's disgusting.
Just take a small bite.
Jim, why don't you just eat the whole thing?
I'm going to eat the whole thing.
Eat the whole thing.
I'm going to eat the whole thing.
I'm not going to do it. We are done though. But thank you very
You're
much.
like a woman of the world, and there's certain things where you've shut the door that are just it's
I have
wrong.
shut the door on that slippery-looking liverwurst over there. Right about
Aiden
2.5
is really
feet.
insulted. He's
I can't
too kind
move.
to tell
I can't move far enough away from it. I'll push it over the edge a little bit more. Okay, we are done. Thank you very much for listening to another edition of Boston Public Radio. Thank you to everyone who came to see the show.
Thank you.
At the Boston Public Library. Thank you to people who had great memories of their moms or their grandmothers
Look what
or
I'm doing
grandparents.
right now. Excuse me.
You're eating a liverwurst,
I'm
Jim.
eating liverwurst.
Good for you. Go for it. Just
put it
go
right
for
in
it.
there.
Okay.
The best way, as I said to the caller, is you get a casing, you get a tube of it, you cut a hole, and you squeeze it right in.
Squeeze it right in. Okay.
What's the matter with that?
You can keep up with us 24/7 way of our podcast or check out our TikTok page,
Really
Boston
good.
Public Radio. Tomorrow we're going to be joined by Boston Globe business columnist Shirley Leung.
She loves liverwurst.
Absolutely. Suffolk County Sheriff Andrew Cabral.
Loves
Comedian Jimmy Tingle, a great guy from Cambridge, we've known him for years. Filmmaker Eric Aronson and Michael Kirk from Frontline on their latest edition of The Choice, where they look at the backgrounds of the presidential candidates and contrast them. Obviously now we have Kamala Harris and Donald Trump.
Can I just say before you go ahead, Jimmy has made his first film about his run for lieutenant governor, a new director,
That's
filmmaker,
right.
and Eric Aronson, who's written some huge hits. It's his first film directing, and as Jared told us, it's a fictitious story about the lead up to the Gardner theft.
Okay. Our crew, Zoe Matthews, Aidan Comley, Nicole Garcia, Hannah Loss, our engineer, John McClaw Parker, our executive producer, Jane Bologna. Special thanks to the Boston Public Library staff, Maddie Geyer, Bill Francis, Juan Jose Cadena, and Sandra Lopez Burke. Thanks to our hosts here at the Newsfeed Cafe and across the street at the Lenox Hotel. Jared's going to be back in a little while. He won't be here in person. He will be on Friday. But his show begins right after the 2 o'clock news, The Culture Show, here on 89.7 GBH. I'm glad you've enjoyed the liverwurst, Jim.
I've just begun, Marjorie. I really have just begun. There's 6 slices left.
Oh, Marjorie's a woman of the world. One of the texters is making fun of me who couldn't find Everett in the map. Actually, I could find
That was
Everett.
Zoe.